rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times.
Star Wars #1.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
All right, here we are, Rebel Force Radio, back with you once again. Hope you've been enjoying the Acolyte after shows. I know there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of opinion going on about the Acolyte. But here at Rebel Force Radio, what we prefer to do is look at the story that's being presented to us. Analyzing it, talking about the plot, how it's all working out, talking about the performances of the actors and all of that stuff. There's plenty of other outlets that are out there saying, I hate this because of this, I hate this because of that. We have our gripes, we have the things that we like, we have the things that we don't like, but the fact is that if we're going to be following the adventures of a galaxy far, far away, we got to look at all of it and take the bitter with the sweet. And that's what we've been doing on that after show. But this is the weekly Rebel Force Radio podcast. Thank you so much for hanging with us. But of course, the Acolyte isn't the only thing happening in the Star Wars universe. It is a big galaxy far, far away. And if you found us through the after show, introductions in order. My name is Jason, and with me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Back for another round of RFR this week. The Acolyte. Truly, well, no matter what you think about it, it's providing us with these great water cooler moments every week. I look forward to Tuesday nights. On Monday morning, I start looking for, I'm like, ooh, tomorrow night is new Star Wars. And then Wednesday, we bring everyone the virtual water cooler with the RFR Acolyte After Show. And it's been I think it's been a lot of fun. And I'm really excited to see how the season's going to conclude next week. I certainly want to see more from Darth Chimere. Why is it I'm the only one who calls him Darth Chimere?
You are the only one that calls him
I'm the only one. I thought for sure everyone would start calling this cat Darth Chimere, but nobody's doing it.
It hasn't caught on yet, Jim. It hasn't caught on.
I guess not. He's Darth Chimere to me, though. And I look forward to seeing how this season's going to end for him and the whole gang. And, somebody's got to take Soul and rub his nose in a little bit of doggy doo-doo, I think, in the season finale because this guy's, he's a real, he's a live wire is what we used to say. He's a live wire. You don't want to touch that, man, or you'll get electrocuted. That's my take on Saul.
But, we're going to go old school this week. I can't believe the opportunity that we have here at Rebel Force Radio to bring to you all an incredible interview with the brother of, the galaxy's princess, Todd Fisher, brother of the late, great Carrie Fisher, who's going to be talking to us about, what is there? I mean, incredible stories about classic Hollywood. Of course, his mother, Debbie Reynolds, his sister, Carrie Fisher, and this incredible new exhibit that's happening at the Ronald Reagan Library in California that is combining political history with pop culture history and commemorating the legacy of Star Wars. By that, I don't mean necessarily the film franchise, the entertainment franchise, but the legacy of the Reagan presidency where he committed to protect America with an anti-ballistic missile system, and his enemies and political adversaries dubbed it Star Wars, and he sort of ran with it. in the Reagan Library leaning into it and saying, hey, in order to tell the whole story about the Star Wars program, we got to talk about the origin of how it got its name. And that's, of course, the legacy of this amazing film saga that all culminated in 1983.
I was a kid in the 80s when Reagan was president, and he started talking about Star Wars protecting the country.
Right.
That really was a mind screw with a young Jimmy Mack. I was, picturing maybe a Death Star over the 48 continental states, TIE fighters flying over Hawaii and Alaska, maybe. But no, it was something very different. Yeah, the SDI thing that was nicknamed Star Wars, defending America and the galaxy. Star Wars and SDI exhibition is going on now until September 8th. At the Ronald Reagan Library in California. And it blends. It's a blend of the history of the strategic missile defense and the actual film Star Wars, from which it gained its nickname. So I like it. You're taking a moment in U.S. history and you're combining it with a moment from U.S. pop culture history to make it more accessible to a lot of people who might not have been around or even heard of this particular moment that happened during Ronald Reagan's era there in the 80s. So Todd is joining us to talk about the items from Carrie Fisher's collection. Todd Fisher, of course, is the archivist for the Fisher family and Debbie Reynolds, his mother. And he donated some really great Star Wars items to this exhibition. He's going to talk to us about that. And, just the crossroads of Hollywood history in which he had a front row seat for. Todd's a really great guy. If you've ever listened to his audio book, My Girls, which was released in 2018, the audiobook is narrated by Todd Fisher himself. He wrote the book about his life growing up as Debbie Reynolds' son and Carrie Fisher's brother. And it's a really great listen. The book itself is a great read. And it provides us a perspective and brings us closer to our long-lost sister in the Force, Carrie Fisher. My wounds are still kind of open when I think back to December 2016.
I got to tell you, Jim, it wasn't that long ago. I think it was just within the last couple of days that I was searching for something on my iPhone, and I saw the text messages that you sent me as I was driving home from the day job, saying that something had happened and that there were reports coming that Carrie Fisher had suffered a major health event on an airplane and that she was in critical condition. I remember very vividly getting those texts from you. And just a couple of days ago, they resurfaced as I was searching for something else.
Crazy.
So, yeah.
Crazy. Well, off the air, I'm going to find out what you were searching for. Going through our old text messages, something to use against Jimmy Mack in the podcast court. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we'll have to dig deep under that. But so, Todd Fisher is an interview that I'm really excited for. I have to say, I like I said, I soaked in his audiobook, and I feel like I already know the guy. And he seems to be someone who really can tell a story about what really happened throughout Carrie's entire career. Yeah. A lot of people love to put words in Carrie Fisher's mouth these days. And you know how the media spins things about all kind of different things. Well, we're going to be talking to Carrie's brother and closest confidant. And this is an interview that you do not want to tune away from RFR. You want to stick around for this one.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do it. Let's head into the cantina with the brother of the Galaxy's Princess, Carrie Fisher, Todd Fisher, joining us now on Rebel Force Radio.
Designer who created the open
Star Wars Cantina.
Where are you going, Master?
For a drink.
Sorry about the mess.
You will never find
the more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
All right, Todd Fisher joining us right now on Rebel Force Radio.
Well, the posters definitely fit our format.
They sure do.
I can say that right out of the gate.
Look at that.
Are you sure?
There he
Because I
is.
wasn't sure if that was on topic or not.
Oh, it's very much on topic, sir. Yes. It's cool. He's got all the original trilogy
Look at
posters
that.
up there.
Which is the one on the... I'm trying to see if that's an anniversary poster of some sort. That might be 20th. It says 77 to 97, I think.
No, to 87.
Yeah,
that's a 10
Or 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
So that one is. I have the original foil back too, the pre-release,
That is so
which
cool.
is foil back, but it doesn't have that. But that was the first 10 years.
Wow.
It says it's the. I mean, some of them are more interesting than others. I probably have. Pretty much every poster.
Well, already, Todd,
like-
I'm blown away by the posters in the background, and it seems sometimes the closer someone is to the business, the industry, the more they sometimes shy away from these things. But if I didn't know any better, I'm looking at this and I would say, this guy's a Star Wars fan that we're talking to.
For years, way back, Carrie was bringing home stuff from Star Wars, and she knew that I had, for an example, a movie gun collection. So she brought me home a blaster, her blaster from Star Wars years later. But I mean, when she saw that I was collecting this stuff, and I did start to collect movie posters back probably in the 80s, even before that, really. But I didn't have a lot of science fiction. In fact, if you look down here, this is where my science fiction posters began. They actually started down there. So that's War of the Worlds, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and of course, Planet of the Apes. I had those long before I owned a Star Wars poster. The Star Wars thing, all of a sudden it was like, wow, of course, how could we not have this?
Sure.
And I was not, like, when the movies came out, I was just happy for Carrie. It wasn't as though it was some earth-shaking. It wasn't my favorite genre, but of course it all became our favorite everything, and Carrie, it is Carrie, it's a lot of people think, oh, what a fine acting job. And I always say she's actually not really acting. She's just being herself. I mean, that feisty girl that tells Darth Vader, I'd recognize your foul stench anywhere. That is Carrie. She used to say that to me sometimes.
Sometimes the actor, chooses the part. I mean, it worked well for John Wayne. There's nothing wrong with characters or actors really being tightly connected to their characters. In fact, I'd argue that results in some of the very best performances, the most memorable ones.
Clint Eastwood, to me was like that too. There's a lot of people that kind of stayed in their lane, played themselves. John Wayne obviously always kind of, I can't think of a role where he really didn't play The Last Voyage Home, was an unusual film for him where he played a Swedish sailor or something. So that's obscure. But generally he played that Western character. And that made a lot of sense because, he owned that thing. I mean, why would you bother what is he going to go out and play Henry VIII? I mean, who would want to see that? It's just like Carrie. I mean, Carrie didn't really take on like really elaborate roles. Like, when Elizabeth Taylor does the movie Who's Afraid of Ginger Wolf, that's also her at that time. But on the other hand, she could have played anything.
Right.
But Carrie, I think one of an acting role for Carrie would be like The Burbs with Tom Hanks, because she has to play a suburban housewife.
Such a classic.
I mean, that's a stretch, buddy. Let me tell you.
But she sure did it well, though. She sure did it well.
She's cute in her little in her little apron and all that. But I mean, that's so far away from Carrie. I mean, that really was. I remember watching that movie and just laughing at the character. For her being that. Carrie is Princess Leia. I mean, she didn't realize it for about 30 years. That she really was that character. If you watch the documentary we did, Bright Lights, you would see that she's sitting out on a balcony after a Comic-Con smoking a cigarette. She goes, well, they think I'm her. I mean, they see me and they think I'm her. And I'm like, duh, of course you are her. I mean, there is no Princess Leia. without that Carrie attitude. I mean, that was why they chose her to be the face of the March on Washington, Women's March on Washington. They chose it because she was the face of the rebellion. I mean, that is just, she was rebellious. And if you really want to get down to it, the person that created this long ago when we were little children was my mother. You know, she was the one that programmed Carrie. That wasn't like George giving her coaching, off to the sidelines. Give it a little more attitude, Carrie. I mean, we never heard that. It was all there already, and my mother had done that. My mother, of course, as you know, is famous for being kind of a feisty, strong woman anyway. But that was an earlier generation. I mean, Carrie's like the next generation, like 3.0, 4.0. I mean, when she comes out of the box, look out. I always say she doesn't need a weapon. You know, there was like, there's a poll they did recently where they said, who's the baddest ass woman ever? You know, and Carrie was in the top contenders of being the most badass woman. Somebody asked me to comment. I said, well, yeah, she was, but, she didn't need a weapon, a gun to be badass. She would kill you with her words. Yes. And, I would see her do that in real life as well as in the films.
Intellect. She had an incredible intellect, and all you have to do is, read her books or watch her one-woman show. It's just incredible. And, she did it all and never lost the sex appeal as well. And so she could be feminine and tough all at the same time. It's a very, very rare combination. Very special.
Well, we recently put I have Carrie's metal bikini from Jedi, and I recently loaned it to the Ronald Reagan Library Museum. They're doing a Star Wars exhibit up there.
Right.
And I have a painting that was painted of Carrie in that bathing suit way back, right after the movie. And she gave me this painting, and it's an incredibly beautiful painting of her in that bikini. And I can't tell you how many people have walked up and said, looking at that painting, said, "You have no idea how much time I spent in front of this picture."
Okay.
So, enough information.
I've got to ask, because that has become, in the year 2024, a little bit controversial, with Disney owning the brand and all that. And I really want to know from her brother, what can you tell us about how she felt, jokes aside, how did she feel about that bikini and that scene that became so iconic? Did she ever tell you anything?
Well, of course, I was around, and I mean, there was conversations. At first, it was like, well, I mean, it's kind of sexist to, put me in this metal bikini and chain me to a giant slug. But in the end, I strangled a guy.
Right.
So, that's kind of Carrie in many ways. I mean, I won't mention names, but there were some people that we'll call sexually harassed Carrie in her life. And she put them away verbally. And then in one particular case, she sent one of these people a sea bass wrapped in a newspaper, the Sicilian Message from The Godfather. And the note just said, "I know people." And she did. I mean, we did know people. My mother worked for Sidney Korshak, who is the Robert Duvall character in The Godfather, who is the lawyer for the Teamster. We could make some phone calls, not quite to the extent of Frank Sinatra, but I would say in second place.
Right.
Yeah. Sidney was the most powerful attorney of his era.
Yes,
Sidney
exactly.
Korshak.
And Carrie, we grew up around these people, and I think she was really half joking, but also serious. And in fact, I was asked a question on a talk show one time, and again, I won't necessarily mention names, but they asked me, well, how would Carrie feel about the Me Too movement? And I said, well, I mean, she doesn't want any woman, of course, to be abused in any way. But the truth is that, she'd be like, I can handle myself, Jack. I mean, that's who she was. I mean, my mother knocked down two men with one punch. I watched it twice. I mean, maybe it happened other times too, but I was standing there and saw her at 98 pounds punch a guy in the face, knock him to the floor. And so, they were little terrors, these girls. I mean, my mother and sister were dynamite.
Yeah, absolutely. You tell the story about that in your book, My Girls.
Yes.
And it was because of a discovery you made that Debbie was getting cheated by the theater because she was supposed to get a cut of the profits they make from selling programs. And you did the math because you were the guy selling the programs. And so you were able to
three of us selling, and there were three of us selling, and I was keeping track of my own sales, of course. And when I went into her dressing room, she had a check, and it showed how many programs she was being compensated for. She got obviously a split. I had sold more programs than they were telling her that had been sold. And there were 2 more people selling. And this is a huge theater. I was like, something is very wrong here. But, welcome to New York. And there was a little short Italian guy that ran the program concession for about another 30 minutes. And then he ran into my mother. And that was that. And she basically told the producer and the head of the Minskoff Theater, she said, either he's gone or I don't go on. It's your choice.
Wow.
Needless to say, we never saw him again.
She was extraordinarily tough. One of my very favorite Frank Sinatra movie is The Tender Trap, which also starred your mother, Debbie Reynolds. It's a fantastic movie. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that I just watched Singing in the Rain for the very first time about 5 nights ago.
Can't be.
I know. I know.
I'm hoping to watch Star Wars soon too. The Star Wars
I got that one covered.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, but I got to tell you, as I'm watching the Tender Trap, I'm just seeing so many similarities between your mother and Carrie, and that feistiness and that spirit is there. So anyone listening to this who thinks, oh, those are old movies, I'm not interested in those, watch Singing in the Rain, watch The Tender Trap, watch any of the great Debbie Reynolds films, and you'll see that Princess Leia spirit in her as well.
You want The Tender Trap? There you go.
What? Oh, he's got the posters.
There it is.
Wow. You have a great poster collection.
Well, I do like a little storyline here, because what happened here was my mother, as you know, made Singing in the Rain. And then, she went on to do Tammy and the Bachelor, and that was a big deal, right? And then she did The Tender Trap with Frank. And when she did The Tender Trap with Frank, he was a bit older than her, like brotherly, said to her, Debbie, I want to give you a piece of advice regarding men. Whatever you do, don't marry a singer. So she goes right out and marries my dad, the singer. So I like putting those 4 posters there because it does tell the story. And by the way, if you think our family learns its lessons, Carrie goes out and marries the singer, Paul Simon. So
that's true.
They don't pay any attention to Frank. He was right all along.
Wow. I mean, Todd, you're one of those guys that, you could just sit and talk to forever about old Hollywood, new Hollywood, all of that. We definitely want to.
I'm not sure about new Hollywood. I'm not. That one doesn't interest me as much. I swear.
Oh, is that right?
Well, I mean,
you're still active. You're still doing projects and things. Yes.
No, I mean, I would be happy to. It's just like I feel as though we've lost a lot of what made us great. I mean, there were things about movies, and I'm not, and Star Wars is one of them. There was not only a magic to all of this, but the story that is there and the characters that are there. That's why when they brought the Carrie and Harrison and Mark back, I was so thrilled because to me, it was the heart of the story. It was like, of course, I was sitting with Carrie at the Chinese TCL Theater when we brought back the characters, and the entire place erupted when they came back. And I was like, duh, of course. but it's we have this country has one of the greatest filmmaking histories there is anywhere in the world. And we made some of the greatest movies ever. And I just don't feel like we are doing as good a job these days. Occasionally something comes out that I think is exceptional, but generally, we were making a lot of good stuff. I mean, you just rattled off some movies, there was a lot of good stuff being made, entertaining stuff, without being too clever. There's a point where you get so clever that I don't even know what you're doing. So yeah, my sister, when we were making the Star Wars films over the years, didn't collect Star Wars stuff either. She had very little Star Wars stuff around, but in her house, she had a few things that people had given her or whatever. And of course, when a product would come out, they would send the product to Carrie, not necessarily to approve of because they didn't need her approval, but I suspect they would give her prototypes and things. So this is where she was always joking about how George, owned her likeness. And when she looked in the mirror, she had to send him a couple of bucks every time she looked.
Right.
But all my life, and I have a lot of that stuff. It's funny because she would get these things and then just throw them in the garage. And my mother recovered it. I recovered a lot of them. And so I have a collection of like all the strangest memorabilia. But you talk about a clever franchise on the merchandising end. I mean, there is nothing equal to it ever. So my life is filled with all of these, Pez dispensers and the shampoo bottle where you screw my sister's head off. And
sure, how crazy was that for you as Carrie's brother whether it be the supermarket or the department store, the toy store, to go around and there's your sister staring right back at you in every aisle.
Well, I'll tell you, I tried to get that back from George, meaning her rights. I had something George wanted really bad. I had the camera that made the first Star Wars that I had gotten from Panavision, and I tried to trade its name and likeness back to Carrie. But of course, it wasn't a fair trade. But I thought it was. I'd take a whack at it because I said, I understand this isn't necessarily worth as much, but I think like you've made enough, on Carrie's name and likeness. In all fairness, I give you the camera, you give her back her name and likeness. It's a good trade. Anyway, that didn't fly. But I do like some of my favorite stuff. Like Carrie told the story about the Pez dispenser because she thought it was really an honor that her daughter could, rock her head back and pull a wafer out of her neck. And she just wondered how many other mothers, had that experience. I tell you what, one of my favorite things, and I have a lot of them. In fact, we have used these to raise a lot of money for charity and other things. I have Carrie's stamp from 2007. It's an envelope and her stamp on there that was issued in 2007. In fact, I have all 17 or 15 of the stamps. Sure. So there's some cool collectibles. And, there's a thing in life where you say, that's an honor, right? To have a stamp.
Sure.
To me, that's an honor. I mean, it's not as good as a Pez dispenser, but maybe it is. I don't know. I always thought it was pretty good. But there's so many things. And then the action figures that go on forever. And the merchandising, there's no end. At the Reagan Library, they have a lot of the action figures and things. I didn't lend any of that stuff, but they have an amazing collection of the things we're talking about. I lent major things, blasters and scripts and things like that. And they have some pretty clever stuff there. It's ironic that I can't remember seeing a really big, or at least at that size, Star Wars exhibit. I mean, we're going to get one, I think, here soon with George. He's building a museum in LA.
Yeah, certainly something permanent will be incredible. But what's so, I think, interesting about the exhibit that we wanted to talk to you about at the Reagan Library is, of course, it's the Star Wars exhibit, but
yes,
the Star Wars moniker for Reagan's proposed anti-missile ballistic system was actually given to him or given to the project by his political rivals and enemies. They used it to poke fun at him, but as a Hollywood actor, he knew the power of that story that had been unfolding in theaters for many years prior to that, and he rolled with it. And here, all these years later, you're combining sort of the joke with the real thing. It's very interesting.
That was obviously their idea, and I think they always try to obviously have some connection back to the Reagans. My family has a longstanding relationship with the Reagans, going back to the movie days. My mother, was friends with his prior wife as well as Nancy, and my mother, spent her life being friends with the Reagans. And the museum itself is an amazing thing. But it's rare that you could bring together something so important as Star Wars and the cultural aspects of it, and then combine it with an actual political / event that really was instrumental in the collapse of the Soviet Union. And to see those two things back to back is unique. I'll tell you, there's something that I learned that I didn't even know at the museum, which was that Reagan didn't really choose the Star Wars name like that the press really started running with that. Mm-hmm. And George apparently sued the government saying you can't use my name.
Wait a minute. Wait, we knew that George was pretty free with the cease and desists. You're telling us that he actually ceased and desisted the U.S. government?
and lost. And you know how you know how they beat him though. It's kind of interesting. They beat him by putting a montage together of all the news clips of the press saying, "Well, the Star Wars initiative over here and Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars." And so every news channel is blasting out this Star Wars thing, and it was pretty obvious that they had run with it, and there was not a person on earth that could have stopped it. And so their excuse was that we had nothing to do with this. Now, of course, we know that's not entirely true, but as long as they won the argument, and there was absolutely nothing that could be done. I have to admit, though, that the Star Wars movie stuff in many ways is cooler than the actual missile defense stuff they have. They have some real missile defense prototypes and computers, and the story is all very interesting and stuff, but there's nothing better than the galaxy far, far away.
Right. That's a proper hook.
They've got things in this museum that I think are fascinating. For example, they show how the original lightsabers were manufactured and how they came up with the design because they didn't have a lot of money to be making advanced weaponry for a science fiction film. The blaster that I have, was made from a Russian target pistol, and so there's some interesting stories to be told within the framework of having no money to make a film. I mean, keep in mind when 2001 Space Odyssey was made, Kubrick had a lot of money. Man, they were making the cameras, they were making the lenses, every single prop, all the space suits, the spaceships, everything was built, incredible designs and like nobody could touch it. So George has got like 1/6 of the budget, years later, and there's no chance. So they really had to be creative. And I guess that's why they were doing things like Wookiees and things like that. I mean, you just get an old carpet and you make a Wookiee. And there's a picture of R2-D2 made from a 55-gallon drum originally, oil drum. So
really? That's
being creative. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, you think about that. I have one of Carrie had 2 droids and I have them, and the R2-D2, it's exactly the dimensions of a drum. And then even his little round head is kind of like the top of the trash can lid.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever thought about it, but when I saw a picture of it, I was like, of course. There you have it.
Right.
But isn't that what we're good at? I mean, Americans are really good at sort of being innovative and making things happen. And, George was back against the wall. I mean, the movie's not even going to get really finished. Along comes Coppola, to help him out, and other little factors that made the movie get finished. I mean, I think if you'd left it up to the pencil pushers at 20th Century Fox, it would have been shut down, which doesn't surprise me.
And of course, beyond George just being someone who hired Carrie and directed her, they actually had a pretty profound one-on-one relationship with each other too, didn't they? And
they were lifelong friends.
Yeah, and he actually collaborated, and she worked with him on scripts, and especially during the prequel era. Do you know much about what sort of work she did on those prequel scripts?
Yeah, I mean, Carrie, as you probably know, became more of a script polisher, and even that term might be broad. I mean, for example, Meg Ryan or other large Meryl Streep would use Carrie to polish their dialogue, and so she may not even get credit on a lot of movies that she wrote significant dialogue or lines in. And Star Wars is no different. I say the later films, she definitely had an influence on that. George, I have a script on display over at the Reagan Museum, and it's signed to Carrie, the script. My mother pulled her script out of the trash can when the movie was over because Carrie said, "We're done with the movie. I don't need this script anymore," and tossed it. God. My mother pulls it out of the trash, sends it to George, and has him sign it to Carrie. And he says, "Easy to say lines. Love, George." And so there's what you're just talking about. The inside joke is Carrie had complained, who would talk like this, in the first movie? And George says, well, if you think you can make her sound better, then let's hear, what would you say? And so there was a collaboration that took place for sure. And everybody respected Carrie's sense of humor and her wit and her satirical nature, her toughness. And George was no exception. And of course, she obviously respected him to the nth degree. I mean, when she did that roast on him,
Classic.
one of the all-time greatest roasts. But one of the things she says was the big question she always gets is, did you know Star Wars is going to be such a big success? She says, of course, we all knew. The only one that didn't know was George. And then when we told him, his expression changed. And so it's true. He doesn't have like a lot of, animated expressions in his repertoire. So people misunderstand that as him being cold or detached, but he's really not.
Yeah.
Do you maintain a friendship with George Lucas at all?
Not since Carrie left. I mean, the last thing, when Carrie left, I was in communication with him because I used a lot of things in the memorial and wanted permission to do certain things. And we stayed in touch, and I probably will lend things to the museum. I'm obviously a big supporter of the franchise forever. And, a lot of people, I'm walking down the airport the other day and a little boy walks up to me and his mother says, "Oh, this is Princess Leia's brother." And the boy goes, "You're Luke Skywalker?" and I said, "No, not exactly. I'm Carrie's real brother." And the kid just couldn't grasp it. Sure. He was like, "You're Luke Skywalker." Well, okay, whatever.
Just roll with it, Todd.
Yeah. So, the truth of them is that I was brought into this world to be a companion to Carrie. I was born about a year and a half later. My mother knew my relationship with my father was on the rocks, and she chased my father down and got pregnant with me. And I'm here, and then, I was here to be her confidant and companion. We did. We were best friends forever and traveled the world together. And, I was by her side through a lot of good times and bum times. And, she was an awesome person, and we were really close. And so, when she left, it did alter the world, but I feel like it's part of my responsibility to continue her legacy where I can. That's why I bothered to lend this stuff to the Reagan Museum. My mother, of course, was friends with the Reagan. Carrie and I knew the Reagans. And in fact, we were the first generation of 18-year-olds to vote. And so by 1980, it was our second election that we could vote in. And my mother came to Carrie and I, and our family were lifelong Kennedy Democrats. I mean, big time. Like my mother was at the inauguration and everything. Right. And my mother came to us and said, "No, we're all Republicans now. We're voting for Reagan." And Carrie and I were like, okay, why exactly?
It happened a lot there with Hollywood because Ronald Reagan was part of that crew. He ran California for 8 years, and then of course ran the country and turned Frank Sinatra himself, who was the epitome of a Kennedy Democrat, into a Republican. So it was definitely something that sweep.
Well, if you could get Carrie to vote Republican, you have a lot of
wow. I'm sure. As you talk about being born just a couple years after Carrie, is there any memories that you have of yourselves as kids? What kind of relationship? I have a boy and a girl too. What kind of a relationship did the two of you have growing up?
Well, I mean, at first, I was. My first steps are on camera. My mother was filming, but who's holding my hand? Carrie. Yeah. So that laid the groundwork. I mean, we played together, we bathed together, we did everything together as little kids. And Carrie was also the person who enlightened me many, many times in life. I mean, good example is one day she comes into the room and she has these tags from all of our Christmas gifts, and she says, "You see this tag here? It says, to Todd, love Santa. And you see this one says, to Todd, love Mom. And this one says, to Todd, love Debbie." And like, a dad. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I see that. You don't know anything funny about that?" And I'm like, "No." So they all have the same handwriting. so she blows the Santa Claus thing and the fact that my father never bought me a gift all in one moment.
Wow, I wasn't going there. I was thinking of the Santa, but you got the dad thing in there as well.
I got both. So I got blown on the Santa thing and the fact that my father could care less, had no time to buy us gifts. But she was onto that long before me. You got to remember, girls, of course, are a little smarter than guys in the evolution of getting reach adulthood. And anyway, and then a year and a half is a big deal. So she was way ahead of me. I mean, always, by the way. I mean, my mother was a great mentor, for her. But like I said, she ran with it. But even later in life, she always wanted me to travel with her. I went to all the premieres with her and sat and hold her hand in the good times and bad times. And, she was tough, but she was also, could be broken. And I was always there, for her. And that was really, in a way, was one of my purposes in the world was to support my mother and sister. And so, and the way they left the world in a way together in so many ways, was less heartbreaking than it could have otherwise been. And my mother, of course, I talk about it in my book and I did an interview on it, but it was, my mother basically told me she was leaving to go see Carrie and did 30 minutes later. And so initially that was shocking, but when I was at the hospital, I flashed like on the conversation that happened like an hour earlier. And I was like, I mean, she just told me everything that was going to happen. I didn't know what she even meant by some of the things she was saying, and now I do. So she kind of telegraphed the entire thing. So that always makes you feel better. The idea that things are planned or purposeful. And my mother was very much like that. Carrie and my lives were planned for everything.
Well, your mother, Debbie Reynolds, I think I get a sense she was a Jedi herself, because she would
absolutely.
She would have visions of the future. She would have dreams that would actually come to reality.
Yeah, that was hilarious. She used to say, it's like she'd come up to us and we'd all be sitting at the table or something. She'd sit down. She's now, dear, I had a dream last night. And when that would happen, everybody go, what's this going to be? Everybody hold on to your seats. And, a lot of times it was like minor stuff, but yes, she was very prophetic in many ways. I think she was also really good at reading people. Like, she was a great people reader. Actors and generally obviously are tuned into the character developments and they want to watch people. And I think a lot of that also was in her, and she really was able to read people. At least me, she could read me really well. Like, there
Moms
was just
can do that.
no point. Yeah, no point in lying to her at all, because you're going to get busted. So just forget it and just take the heat, because it's going to be cheaper.
Wow, she'd see right through everything. That's amazing. I mean, she really was a terrific woman. And I got to tell our listening audience to check out your book, Todd, My Girls. There's an audio book which you actually narrate, and it's really wonderful. And I've listened to it, and I feel like I already know you. You provided me, you held the door open for me as a lifelong Star Wars fan who was there since the beginning in 1977, and someone who really loved Carrie as well. But you held the door open, and I could see... I feel like I got to know her much better than even reading her own writings, because
that's why I wanted to do that.
And you did. I really, really just got to tell you,
when I did the audio book, they actually said to me, "Do you want somebody else to read the book?" And I said, "I haven't really thought about it, but no, I'll do it." So I started doing the audiobook. And of course, as I get into the latter chapters, in particular about, losing my mother and sister and my best friend, Miguel Ferrer, and other things, I mean, I'm going one paragraph at a time before I'm choking up. And at a certain point, I said to the engineer, I said, "Who the hell wrote this thing?" Because it was,
and that's your buddy who engineered it, right? That's your buddy, though, who engineered it, right? When you're old friends.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But still, I mean, I don't care who's sitting there. I was like, I couldn't walk out of the room and take a break. It didn't matter. You couldn't give me a glass of water. It didn't matter. It was just going to rip me apart. And I was like, I realized it was cathartic, to write a story anyway. And the purpose of the book is obviously to give a different perspective on these two girls and their lives and accomplishments, from a person that loved them the most. And so I have a unique perspective on their lives, and I wanted to explain it. I also wanted to get in front of some of the BS, like with Carrie in particular. There were a lot of people that were going to come back and tell out of school bullshit stories about her drug use and other things. And I wanted to get that all out in the appropriate way. Carrie was the first person to out herself, for using drugs and things like that. And I just wanted it to be in the right perspective and to do things with love rather than nonsense. So there's my wife looking for her phone.
Oh, the Find My app. Yeah. Very
yes, we're
familiar
doing a
with
little
it.
commercial for Apple here. It works fantastic, by the way. But I felt like that I had I got a phone call one day from the press after another book came well after mine had come out, and it and they had in there the toxicology report of Carrie's blood work in the hospital when she passed. And they said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "What do I think about what?" And they said, "Well, the fact that she had drugs in her system." I said, "What? That's news?"
Yeah,
I mean, I got 4 books in front of me that she wrote where she talks about this. I mean, there is no news. I used to get high with her. I mean, there is no news. Carrie never made bones about it. There's not any question.
She owned it. She owned it. That was the refreshing thing.
Illness.
Yeah.
See, the mental illness also, between the two, she took the shame away from both. And that's big because a lot of people fall back into drug use or alcohol abuse or mental illness because of the shame associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
Cat? I'm on the air.
Hi, Cat.
See?
Hi, Cat.
Come say hello anyway. Can she come say hi? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
She can come and say
I feel like I know
Looks like $1
Cat
million.
from your book as well.
She's on her way to do a show.
I didn't.
Hi. It's a pleasure to
do a
meet
show.
you, Cat.
I'm going to do a show right now.
Well, have
So
fun.
you give.
She's doing
She gives
mentalism
psychic
show.
readings,
I'm
right?
a
Break a
mind
leg.
reader show, yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
it's good. It's
My mother handed off that whole Zen mind reading thing to her.
Oh.
So there's no point in lying to her either.
so I'm dressed for a show.
That's- yeah,
and
it's-
have a great interview, everybody. And it's nice
Thank
to
you,
see
Kat.
and meet you.
Thank
okay.
you.
Nice to see
meet
you
as
too.
well.
See, there you go.
Wow.
A walk-in
Kat.
celebrity visit.
That's awesome.
That's huge. That's huge. So you guys are in Vegas, right? And she performs
We moved
there
to
regularly,
Vegas.
or-
Yeah, we moved like back in 2010, and
Mm-hmm.
we really felt like this was our place. Now, when I was a little boy, we were here a lot, and in
Mm-hmm.
fact, Carrie and I, as children, were here. And then the first place Carrie and I were ever on stage together was here in Las Vegas. And my mother always maintained a home here for decades, since the 70s. So we really considered this to be like dual citizenship, California and here. And but like in 2010, I met Kat, and she loved it here more so even than California. And my mother, of course, was here a lot. And so we bought a home right across from the South Point Hotel and Casino, which is where my mother was performing. So my mother was like, well, I'm moving in there. So now we built the family compound, which is what we do, by the way. Our family
perfect.
doesn't just buy houses. We build compounds.
Yeah.
That way we can all
You've
live
reached
around
that
each other.
status. You, speaking of the Kennedys, you have the compound.
Todd, did you go see?
I'm not sure who is copying who, but we had a tendency to want to be around each other when we were off the road or finishing a movie or whatever. We liked to be together, and it required larger properties. So my mother bought a home right next to Carrie's property, and it became 5 acres in Beverly Hills. And we had a family ranch that was 44 acres. And here in Vegas, we have 5 acres and multiple houses and recording studios and production facilities. So, you can really just stay and do your thing. I'm sitting here staring at my mother's Christmas tree. Yeah, there you go. So that was the first time we
Look at
performed
this.
on
We got a
stage
photo
together.
up right now of all 3 of you on stage in Las Vegas. Look at you. Do you still play the
was the
guitar,
Desert Inn.
Todd?
I do. And in fact, that was the guitar I'm holding there is actually my mother's guitar from The Singing Nun. I didn't own a guitar yet. I just had learned to play. And so I later got my own guitar, but this went on for years. And Carrie, of course, loved this whole thing. And this was around the time when Donnie and Marie were getting kind of big and all of that, especially a few years later. This was really our first time on stage. And so we got offers to perform at other hotels to be opening acts and things. My mother was like, no chance, that's not going to happen. And Carrie got furious at my mother. I was thankful because like the whole performing thing, when you're my age, like, I'm maybe 8 or 9. It's like by the time you're like 11 or 12, the idea that you have to put on makeup every day, wash your hair every day, bathe every day at 11 years old, that was a nightmare. So I wasn't thrilled about those requirements to show business here in Las Vegas. So my mother just let me play guitar for Carrie for a while, which was fun. I have other pictures I'd share with you of me just playing guitar with her. And this is when she would sing like Bridge Over Troubled Water. And then ironically, just a few years later, she would married the guy
Crazy.
that wrote that song.
Yeah, right.
And,
to Paul Simon,
and then, of course, they would
That's
create their
amazing.
own version of Bridge Over Troubled Waters, the turbulent marriage at best. Yeah, but
That's
it's like,
amazing. Your mom had a huge collection of Hollywood memorabilia, and she also owned the guitar that was used in
Sound of Music.
Sound of Music. Did you ever play that guitar?
Yes, I did. In fact, it's really a nice nylon string guitar made by Goya, and it was not chosen because it was like the most expensive guitar of its time. It was chosen because it was representative of the guitar, the actual nun from the real story. The Singing Nun is actually a true story, and they chose something that would have been representative of not the most expensive showbiz guitar. So that's the guitar that she played. Now, my mother played that in the movie and then later played it in her act for a little while and played that song Dominique, Anika, Nika. And that's when she gave me the guitar because she wasn't going to play guitar and let me play guitar. And so that was kind of a cool, I have that guitar on display here, by the way. But the Sound of Music guitar and the outfit, my mother purchased both of those at the 20th Century Fox auction. And there you go. And that guitar was a very nice nylon string guitar. And of course, that movie was a lot of fun. But nobody did a better job than Julie in that. That was really something. They could really screwed her when they didn't give her the Oscar for that one. And then they give it to her for Mary Poppins. Hello. the deep, multi-layered role of Mary Poppins compared to the Sound of Music. It's like
that was a make good right there.
That's right. It's like, how do we fix this? But we had all the costumes. We had the curtain costumes of the children. She had 3 of Julie's costumes, and it was her collection. Included the 14 Marilyn Monroe the subway dress and 14 other Marilyn Monroe dresses, as well as the silent film Chaplin and Buster Keaton and the early era all the way up to contemporary film. So you had everybody from Betty Davis to Gary Cooper to, Gone with the Wind, every Academy Award winning film from the beginning of the Academy up till in the mid 2000s when she stopped collecting, we had represented. And what was cool about my mom is she didn't just go for the winners, anything that was nominated. She would have a costume from that film. Because let's take Gone with the Wind, for example. I blurted that out. That same year, you had The Wizard of Oz and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I don't know the fourth one, but it's like, what? Those are small change. Let's not represent that. So she went out of her way to get Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and The Wizard of Oz. And of course, The Wizard of Oz is majorly iconic at this point. I mean, nothing quite that's eclipsed even Gone with the Wind in many ways. My mother was always taken by that. In fact, a lot of the only things. She didn't keep a lot of stuff on the large scale after selling out, but she did keep a pair of ruby slippers, and she used to keep it on her mantle.
Wow.
Well,
she had another pair that she sold, I believe, like a prototype pair, and that went for those were fat cash.
Almost $1 million. So those were the Arabian slippers, we called them. They were designed by Adrian. And when Buddy Epson got poisoned by the silver paint and they redid the production, they switched out the dress and the slippers for a different design after sort of rethinking the whole thing. And we had those. And those went for that much because, of course, they have an unusual story. It's kind of cool when you can say, the movie was going down this path and then we switched because of this catastrophic event for Buddy Epson. Yeah. Interestingly enough, there were a lot of things were like that. Cleopatra was a good example. And now this one's personal.
I would imagine.
My father is involved.
Right.
So as my mother used to joke, my father went down the Nile with Elizabeth. And she was, of course, referring to right around the Cleopatra time. But all seriousness, my mother famously was, married to the singer Eddie Fisher, who is a very popular crooner. And they're the ruby slippers. Now, those are the Arabians, as we talked about from the Wizard of Oz.
The prototypes.
There, yeah.
But in the movie Cleopatra, the same thing happened because when Mike Todd died, they shut down the production. And this is where Carrie likes to tell the joke that my father immediately rushed to Elizabeth's side, slowly and gradually moving his way around to the front. And that was her saying, And then, of course, that was the end of their marriage in many ways. But here's the thing. They did the same thing there. They switched all the costuming. So they shut down the production while Liz was recovering, and then they redid a lot of the costume design. So we had costumes that never made it into the final version of Cleopatra that had been cut from the film. So that's not uncommon, and those stories can be just as interesting as the final version.
Todd, what's interesting here is that your mother was a major Hollywood celebrity. What was, and sometimes that turns people off because they see how the sausage is made, so to speak. But your mother being a collector and wanting to sort of relish that a collector is essentially a fan. She was in the industry, but also a fan. That's very interesting to me.
Well, it is, but here's how you can understand it. She was a fan first. My mother grew up in Burbank as a teenager, came here in the 1930s and during the Depression, and she would go to the El Portal Theater in North Hollywood for a dime and see the movies. And she was a huge fan of all the people that we grew up on them, but maybe you know, maybe you don't. Betty Davis,
Sure.
Gary Cooper, Katharine Hepburn, etc. And so she's a huge fan. And then she gets discovered in 1948 by Warner Brothers because of the Miss Burbank contest. And that gets her into the industry. And she immediately is doing these little nonsense films at Warner Brothers, but MGM sees it. And some people over there thought, wow, I think we can do something with her. And they bring her to MGM. And of course, she does Singing in the Rain, and the rest is history. And now all of a sudden, she's both. So she's walking the streets. Imagine being a teenager, walking the streets at MGM, going to school there with Elizabeth Taylor, Roddy McDowall, Margaret O'Brien. Little schoolhouse is still there, by the way, on the Sony lot. I can't hardly call it that. But at any rate, they walk those streets. And when they're walking down the street, they're like, oh my God, that's Gary Cooper. Oh, there's Katharine Hepburn. It's like you can't believe what you're seeing, and she was like that. She was a fan and was blown away. So, segue forward, she becomes the #1 box office female in the early '60s for a few years running. Huge, very big star, and she's still that same fan, that same person. And so when the studios decide to liquidate, she feels a huge sense of urgency and loss or impending doom. So she takes it upon herself to save this history. And she went to everybody to ask for help for 5 decades and couldn't find it anywhere. A few places. Elizabeth helped her, a few people helped, but no one stepped up the way she did. And why did she do that? So growing up, we had these giant houses and all of that, and they were filled with art. You know how many pieces of Hollywood memorabilia and posters were hanging in our homes? Zero.
Really?
Because she didn't buy it for us. She bought it for us, meaning like the people. She didn't buy it for her family or herself to have in her house. All collectors, like even me, we put our stuff out. This is my stuff.
Right.
I got to show you my stuff. And like the George Carlin jokes. And so I happened to win the award for having the most stuff, but at any rate. But she was like not putting out anything, never did, because she knew it belonged in a museum. She understands the significance and importance for our legacy as a country. And so that's why she collected. So she remained a fan to the bitter end. My mother, when she made a movie called June Bride at Warner Brothers with Betty Davis, had a little teeny small part. Just a few years later at MGM, she's making a movie called The Catered Affair with Betty Davis in a starring role written by Gore Vidal, a really brilliant script. And I mean, man, that is like, you talk about getting shot out of a cannon. But then they became great friends. And that led, of course, to me, the story in my book, telling the story about me talking to Betty Davis on the toilet. So
you walked in. I was dying to get you. You said Betty Davis so many times. I'm like, as soon as he takes a breath, I got to ask about the time he walked in on her while she was sitting on the toilet.
Well, you'd say some people could hear that and think it's my fault, but let's set the story up properly.
It's your house.
We were in this giant house, but these parties were big, right? So there's a time, depending upon where you are in the cycle of things, where there are not enough toilets to go round. So no matter who you are, how big of a star you are, you got to go, right? So she went into the back section of the house where Carrie and my room was. And Carrie's room was busy, and she came into my room and went into my bathroom. Well, she for whatever reason, she left the door open. I had a separate little stall room with the door to the toilet. But she left the door open, and I came walking in the room, came around the corner, and there was Betty Davis sitting on my toilet with the door open. And of course, I kind of recoiled back, like, "Oh my God!" And then she says, with her little, "Well, Betty Davis" kind of voice, just, "So Todd, tell me, how's school?" And she starts chit-chatting with me, kind of making small talk. And, to be honest, I was like, if you had a picture of me, my ears would have been bright red. I was like so embarrassed. Now, I didn't see anything really, but when somebody's pants are around their ankle, it's a little humiliating. So anyway.
Do you recall telling Carrie this story and how she may have reacted to it?
She was jealous. I think she walked in on James Garner peeing in her bathroom one time.
Wow.
Maverick. So that was good. Yeah. So, this was back in the Grand Prix days, right? So, but he was now, Betty Davis, when I met her, and we're talking about this story, was a little bit older. This is a little older in time. But James Garner at this time was truly a real iconic man, like a Steve McQueen kind of guy, a guy's guy. And he used to come into my room all of the time, and he didn't like the parties. So they had these giant parties going, and he'd slept into my back room with me and my buddies. We'd be playing slot cars. And he would play on the slot car track with us, and we'd be tripping out because at that point the movie Grand Prix had come out, and we're like, damn, we're sitting here with James Garner. I mean, this is the star of. And so my favorite story is there were these, the different kinds of racing cars, and I said to him, this is a Brabham, which was the type of a racing car at the time, a Formula One car. And he said, no, that's an Indy Eagle. And I said, well, I'm telling you, this thing, it says right here on the car that it's a Brabham. He said, and I'm telling you, it's an Indy Eagle. And so I had this debate with James Garner. And, there was no winner in particular because it said on the car what it was. But the truth is, he was right. So I have a signed autograph picture that he sent over to the house a few days later. It says, next time we're together, don't try to tell me that an Indy Eagle is a Brabham. And there he is. That's how handsome he was. Now, he had made a couple of movies with my mom, and they were really charismatic together. I mean, they were something else. So he was such a nice guy too. And this is another example of an actor, that was not pretentious and, didn't act like a movie star or a big star. I was fortunate enough to grow up around my mother and other stars that didn't, act like snobs or like movie stars. And my mother used to say to celebrities all the time, when she'd hear a celebrity complaining about how like people or the press are bothering them and all that, she says, well, you really should consider another line of work. Right. And they would be really offended. Like, what? I'm a brilliant actress. Yes, I know. But you see, this is what comes with the lunch. Without these people, you have no career. You'd be talking to the mirror. So
right. Hey, Todd, I got to ask about when there was a moment, there had to have been a moment when you and your mom and the family realized that this Star Wars movie that Carrie did was really, really big. Can you go back and kind of describe
I can.
And I do remember, you realized that it was going to be a phenomenon.
Well, it was early. So we were fortunate in the sense Carrie called me and she said, listen, there's a screening of this little science fiction film that I did in England. You visited me on the set. It was kind of weird. Might be a horror show, B movie, but would you come with me? And I was like, well, sure, of course. So we go to the 20th Century Fox back lot and we pull into the parking lot and it's pretty crowded. And I start to try to get her out of the car and she said, I want to smoke a cigarette. And so she's smoking, and now it's getting closer and closer to the point where literally the lights have dimmed and the movie is starting. I said, Carrie, we got to go in there. There's not going to be anywhere to sit. So she finally agrees to come with me. She puts her cigarette out, sort of, takes her Coca-Cola, and we go in. We have no seats left but the front row. So we sit in the front row. She's got a hold of my hand. She's crushing my hand. And, the battle cruiser flies over. And I looked at her and I said, well, this is definitely no B movie. And, within a couple of minutes, she comes on running down and she's shooting and all that. And we're like, oh my God, what is this? And we knew immediately. In fact, we went out and bought stock that next morning in 20th Century Fox. We knew it was going to be a hit. Also, within a day or so, we were in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater together, standing right next to my mother's footprints there. And to this day, that's where a plaque sits of Carrie, right next. It's the only mother-daughter team in the courtyard at Grauman's. And we were standing right where that plaque is now, and we were looking out at the people sleeping on the sidewalks. And we were like, this is a phenomenon. You're watching something I don't know that we'll ever see again. I mean, there's been big movies, Titanic is big, whatever you want to say.
Sure.
But there was, and still is, there's a loyalty and a fanaticism to that soap opera. I mean, when I was growing up, we had a cook. Her name was Mary. She was with us for over 50 years. And she would watch soap operas every day. And she used to say to Carrie and I, even when we were little kids, I got to stop what I'm doing right now and watch my show and my people. Well, that's what Star Wars was. Those are their people. People come up to me that feel like they know Carrie. I mean, they're related to her, and you put them all together. Many times I was with all three of them or even two of them. Man, there was a lot of magic to that. A lot of magic. That was a very amazing. You got to give George credit. He saw it all in many ways, but I think it's a little bit of magic involved, beyond just the skill of choosing characters, writing words. I mean, there's a lot of magic in that story. And that's why when Disney comes along later and wants to change things, I'm not really hip to some of the things they're trying to write into these stories. And I doubt George would like it either. And I know Carrie wouldn't like it because it's not well written to boot. But
we could use Carrie's script doctoring these days, I think, in Star Wars.
Well, you need also some clout, because there needs to be someone in the room that says, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
That is just not the heart of the story. And we're not caving to some wokeness or something. I mean, it just doesn't all fit in the box. I'm all for fairness and everybody having rights and all that's a beautiful thing.
Right.
I love the song by John Lennon, Imagine, but guess what? It's not realistic. And we'll do our best to make it happen, but it's not anything I've seen. But I just feel like there's always this group of people meddling with that. And I was watching George's reaction to some of it too. I think he's been rather subdued, all things considered.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. Now, what did Carrie share with you about her experiences returning for the sequels? Because obviously, unfortunately, we didn't get the opportunity to hear her recount her experience in retrospect. So maybe you could provide a little insight into how that whole experience rubbed off on her.
Well, I initially it was like, "Are you serious?" Yes, we're serious. And then she was like, "Well, how much money?"
Sure.
and
of course.
All of that's relevant, right? But then it once you get all that settled, then it becomes kind of like, well, wait a minute, this could be pretty cool. And it took on that feel. She was proud at that point. For the lull of time in between, I don't think Carrie really saw herself as one with that character. She didn't even quite know how to articulate who she was as it related to Princess Leia. So, in the HBO documentary, she says, Princess Leia and I, they look at me and they see her. You could see she doesn't quite know what all the rest of us know. And we all know that she and Princess Leia are one. And there was no way to change that. It will never be able to be changed. And that is why when they brought her back, it was a really righteous thing in the story. And that's why everybody cheers like a football game, and it's because it's like you're erupting with joy and to see this thing come back. And so, she was happy about it. There's pictures you can find all over the internet of Carrie and I and Billy, her daughter, at the opening of the first one. And, everybody was pretty happy about it. It was a thing that really needed to happen and should have never been taken away, frankly, in my view. They should have not had this sort of lull in the middle, because to me, that I don't even know what those movies are. I mean, I can't even remember them. So when they started putting her back, so I was sitting in the yard with Carrie a couple of times, and she would joke, about how we're making Star Wars 77. And, it was really Star Wars 7, but, like she's being facetious. But as much as she's joking, she's not unhappy about it, and I don't think any of them really were unhappy. And they did a really good job with her. I don't know about the hairdo stuff, but,
Carrie didn't care for it either.
One of my all-time favorite Carrie moments is when she saw this hairdo and she called it, and we use it as a drop here on the podcast, baboon ass. She
said it was a baboon
of this.
But what's funny? Because that's yes, and of course the Buns had a similar reaction on the set, and we were talking about some of the wardrobe issues, including the malfunction or the lack of underwear and the things of this nature. So there was always something about all this, but I never saw her say, "I'm not doing that." And like she was a big enough star by that point where she could have rebelled in some fashion, but she was a professional, but also at some point you have to say to yourself, he knows something. This guy knows something. I'm just going to roll with it. Okay, George, I trust you. $5 billion later.
Cha-ching. But, it was great seeing her, and Jason just put up that shot of Carrie. And I mean, she looks absolutely so beautiful in all of these shots. And from what I understand, she took it very seriously. It was more than just, she wasn't always flippant or just to be funny. She really treated this as a very serious project and put her all into it and was convinced that she would continue in the role forever in her own words.
I like to say at this point, the picture you're looking at, she's at her prime. She's at her prime in many, many ways. Intellectually, yes, but as an actress, she's got a great depth to her that she did not have in 1977 or 6. She is at her prime. And that is why it was such a great loss, to take her out of the game so early in many ways, although it was a miracle that we had her that long in many ways. My mother and I were always kind of waiting for the phone call, so to speak, given her lifestyle choices. But that was, I think, Carrie at her best, that stuff that they did there. And, her and Harrison together there, I mean, it tears your heart out. And, you got to love that stuff. I mean, it's brilliant. And they were, of course, he's, at this point, also an amazing actor. He's done so much. So look at the depth that you have. Look at the experience that you have there. What great assets to bring to bear into furthering this story. I mean, wow. That's how I felt when I was watching this. It was just like, I don't know what to say. This is just awesome.
Well, they were, for me growing up, I'm sure Jim agrees. I mean, they were the biggest characters, the biggest stars, the biggest personalities of our youth, of our childhood, and to see them all those years later reunited on the screen was absolutely magical. And people can get an opportunity to get up close and personal with Carrie's items now through you, Todd, at this exhibit at the Reagan Library. Now, you had mentioned earlier that your family has a history of friendship with the Reagans. How did this come about, your involvement? Did they reach out to you and say, do you have things from Star Wars? How did this start to involve you?
Well, there's a mini-series coming out on Reagan, and they shot it up there. And the Reagan Foundation and the Reagan Library were generous to allow them to film up there. And the production designer is a friend of mine, and she said to the curator up there, he mentioned they were going to do a Star Wars exhibit, and she said, well, have you talked to Todd Fisher? And the guy says, no, I don't know I wouldn't know how to get in touch with him. she's like, well, what are you putting on display? And so he explained that he had a few things that he could borrow from this collector and this collector. And they even had George, who was going to lend some big items, but the bureaucracy apparently was too much for everybody, and they couldn't get a deal done. So he contacted me, and my instant reaction was, of course, this is exactly what my mother wanted. She wanted this stuff to be seen and shared by the fans, the people. And one step further is the connection between my mother and the Reagans. Obviously they were friends, and that's important. And after, he was our governor, he was our president, he was president of SAG. I mean, this guy was amazing. In fact, I was wearing a hat earlier that had one of his slogans on it. But he was a force to be reckoned with, and a politician that knew how to cross over all boundaries and unite people, inspire people. I mean, he really had a magic about him. And when you met him, it was magnetic. I remember in my life meeting certain people. I met Charlie Chaplin, for an example, and I can you're right. And somebody my age, that's pretty significant. But it was like I remember everything about it, But when I met Mr. Reagan the first time, it's like, well, hi there, Todd. Nancy and I, well, and he had that style about him, almost like a swaggering sort of voice, and. But he looked you in the eyes and he shook your hand, and that was substantial. I could tell you, I remember those moments. When I grew up around Elizabeth, see that look. When I grew up around Elizabeth Taylor, I didn't know her really well till later in life. But in my 20s, I actually sat down, and had one-on-one conversations, deep conversation with her. And when she would look you in the eyes and get a hold of your hand, forget it. I mean, it was mesmerizing.
Well, I got to tell you, Todd, I have to say this. I got to break in and say this. Jason and I sat down with your sister, Carrie, about 14 years ago and had about a 20-minute conversation with her on microphone. We interviewed her. And at one point during the conversation, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. And my head just about exploded right there in the middle of the interview. So I totally know what you're talking about.
Well, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And I mean, you don't have to be super famous necessarily for that to occur. I've met people that were not necessarily gigantically famous that I was, but obviously those people were famous for a reason. It wasn't just that they got famous because somebody backed them in certain ways. I mean, they had a charisma, they had a power. They had, as Carrie would say, a je ne sais quoi. And It's like they had it. And there are a lot of people do and don't. But those people, you remember, when I met John Wayne, I was a little boy, and we were going to take a ride on his yacht. And, he reached down with this giant hand, at least it seemed that way to me, and my hand fit into his hand. And he knelt, he's kind of had to swoop down because I was very small and he was huge. And, and he had that funny little smile, a classy little smile about him. And, the way he greeted me and just little small talk, enough though, that it mesmerized you. You're like, whoa. Yeah. Like when he walked away, I remember standing there for a minute and went, wow. Okay.
That's a movie star right there.
He's, yes, I guess that's a good way to also look at it. I mean, he was truly the definition of that. And part of that, though, comes great responsibility towards your fans and towards your persona. So a class act is important if you're going to be a movie star. It's best if you're a classy one. My mother was a class act. She had grace and dignity. She had values. She loved her country. She loved her, fellow actors and her job. She loved what she did. She treated her fans as family. I mean, I could go on. And those qualities are what makes a star. A lot of the other stuff, money and how much you get paid and all that's not.
Well,
that is not
your sister Carrie was the very first of what we call in Star Wars fandom the big three of Carrie, Mark, and Harrison. Carrie was the very first of the big three to start to do the convention circuit and greet the fans and meet the
I'm
fans.
the one that did that.
You're
Really?
the one that convinced her to do that.
Yes. Here's how this went down. We had a charity event coming up. So we went to Carrie and I said, I need you to sign a couple of things we're going to auction off for this charity thing that we're doing. No problem. She signed a couple of things. Well, when we auctioned those things off, it went for psychedelic money. And I said, what the heck is that? And the guy said to me, there's no autographs of Carrie anywhere. She doesn't do any of the shows. She doesn't sign autographs rarely. It's rare. And so I was like, oh, okay. So a few weeks later, a friend of mine that runs a autograph show down in like Los Angeles through a guy named Robert Noodleman who ran the Hollywood Heritage Museum. They came to me and they said, is there any way you could get your sister to do this? Because we just saw what those autographs went for at auction, and man, she would do really, really well if she came to sign autographs. And so I went to Carrie and I said, would you be interested? She's like, nah. I said, well, I'm just going to say, like, you're likely to walk away with like a lot of cash. Now, I remember her pausing and saying, what's a lot of cash? I said, like 20,000 in cash, like these kind of numbers, for a few hours work. And she says, I remember her saying, okay, I'll try it. So she did one. Now, what was interesting is, yes, she did get it got more than that, by the way. But what happened is she had a blast. And she was reaching in to how we were brought up. And she was living something that my mother had taught her since we were little children. I tell the story in my book that we were walking down the streets of Beverly Hills and we were maybe 5 or 6 years old, and we have my mother by each hand as we're strolling down the street. We're going to the toy store on Beverly Drive. And just before we get in the door of the toy store, some fans come up and they stop us and they start chit-chatting with my mother. And Carrie and I are pulling on her. Let's go into the toy store. And my mother pulls us down to her eyes and comes down to our level and looks us in the eye and she says, these people are our family. Without them, we wouldn't have anything.
Wow.
And I'm going to take time to talk to them. That was a lesson that went on through Carrie and I throughout life. So when we were traveling with her all over the world, she always took time to listen to every story, to sign every autograph of every request, and listen to stories like this. Oh, Debbie, I met you. You remember we were at Atlanta at the dinner theater. It was like the 8 o'clock matinee, and I said hello to you backstage. You remember that? And, Carrie and I'd be going, oh my God. And my mother would just, my mother would be like, well, dear, I don't probably remember that exact moment, but yes, I remember playing that theater. Yes. And she would just go with it. And the people remember that then forever. So segue forward, Carrie starts doing these autograph shows and she's drawing on that lesson, those life lessons, that the stuff that was burned into our consciousness by our mother's class and grace. And so she was then putting that out. And I have film of her at these autograph shows. In fact, we have some footage in the Bright Lights documentary of her at the autograph show. She's loving it. And yes, it's work and it's tough and all that, but the gratification that comes back from the love and the adoration is overwhelming, and it makes you able to get through, a very long day of meet and greet.
Oh, the
she
glitter.
used to throw that
Remember
sparkly glitter. Yeah, she throw. Me and Jason are thinking the exact same way.
Yeah,
she even brought her own special effects to the table by splashing people with glitter. And of course, Gary the dog was ever present too. It just was. It was such an experience to be in her orbit when she was out there making those public appearances.
And she put it on a bit of a show during it too. You see how she really gave you more than what a lot of these celebrities do. I've been to these autograph shows. Some of the people are barely awake. They're just getting through it. But Carrie is looking people in the eye and giving them that moment.
Yeah.
There's a time where we just talked about it. You meet certain people and you remember that moment. That was a moment. I had a moment. I knew that person. And for that moment, I was the most important person there was to Carrie Fisher, and that was important to me. And she was able to convey that because we grew up on my mother doing that thousands and thousands of times in our face.
Wow. I mean, you could tell someone how to act towards the fans, but to be a child and witness a parent who is living that life, it obviously burned a huge impression on both you and Carrie. And I can tell by the way you're being so generous with us and your time and your stories right now that it rubbed off on you too, Todd.
Well, it did, but I happen to, dig what you guys are doing, and I am a rebel just by genetic code, and so I am all for anybody who wants to be a rebel, and I think Americans are rebels by nature. I'm staring over on my wall over here at a 13-star flag that was from the American Revolution. And so I think, and that was Carrie's flag, by the way. So she was a rebel at heart. And that flag was given to her as a wedding gift by Paul Simon. So it's now sitting on my wall. We made a trade while she was still alive. But we have there's a rebellious streak, I think, in all of us, and I think your show, it likes to discuss these matters.
We do.
Thank you very much, Todd. I appreciate
You can get tickets for this incredible exhibit at the Reagan Library at reaganlibrary.com/Star Wars. That's the URL. Ticket prices start at $25, and there's discounts for seniors and all of that. Check it out. The exhibit runs through September 8th, 2024. And Todd, I hope that this is just the beginning of some of the incredible items that you have in your collection that belong to your sister that will make the rounds. I think it's awesome to be able to share it with the fans.
I do have hundreds of items, and we do have a small museum here, but I still have a lot of things, and I do loan things to the Academy. My wife and I do a live show called Cat and Todd Live that's going to be going out on YouTube. That we were doing on Facebook for a long time during COVID. My wife, she said, "Will you do the show with me during COVID?" It'll probably just be a few weeks. 2 years later, we're still doing
there
the
you
show.
go. Right.
But what was cool about the show is it became about collecting, and it became about storytelling and Hollywood memorabilia and Hollywood stories and people we knew. And I started pulling out film clips that we have in our archives. We have over 200,000 stills in our archives. We have hundreds of hours of motion picture film that's home movies, and some of it is television shows and interviews and things. So there's a depth to the collection that goes beyond the costumes, but it's all connected to the storytelling. So we do this live show. We do it on Saturdays. And so I'm probably, and we're going to put up all the old shows and pull out the segments and then try to do the annotations to like what I'm talking about, what story I'm saying. Like we were talking about Betty Davis, so we pull out that segment about Betty Davis and somebody
what's the best place to find all of this? Is there there's toddfisher.com. Is that the best place to send folks?
That's my website, but Cat and Todd Live on the YouTube channel. There is a channel there, and there are shows there right now. We're just getting into it. I mean, I suspect, because like I say, we did it on Facebook, but we've made everything available on YouTube now. We're gonna start editing and adding more stuff. We have a whole inventory of shows that are things that were that were produced by my mother, things that were produced by my father, interviews that my mother did with other great celebrities, things that have just never been seen by anybody, and that stuff pops up on these shows. So we're going to definitely continue to do that, and we've had a lot of fun too, because we do fundraising for different charity things. Like we just did a fundraiser to rebuild my mother's sign from the Las Vegas hotel that she had here. And it's her giant signature. It says Debbie Reynolds was on the hotel. Mm-hmm. So it was in the neon sign graveyard. But it's a giant sign. It's very expensive to light it back up. So the company that made the sign was Yesco and the Neon Museum people. We all got together and we raised the money to rebuild the sign. And so that's going to be relit here in Vegas at the Neon Museum.
That's fantastic.
And so, but that's just like, we also raised money during COVID to buy laptop computers for children, because the dumbest thing in the world happened here in Vegas. They say, well, you can't come to school anymore. You stay home and learn on your computer. But guess what? Not everybody's got the money for a laptop computer. I mean, what are you talking about?
So true.
We started to go out and figure out who could afford laptops, and we ended up giving out tons of laptops and all sorts of other things. There's always a cause. My mother had a famous thing that she used to do to Carrie and I, and she was like, she was a spiritual person, but not in a preachy sense. So she would say, we are the eyes and the ears and the hands of God. Now, my mother was involved in more charity events than any person on earth, practically, including going to Korea during the war. And so everything she saw that was in her path, she felt that it was happening for a reason. And if there was something she could do about it, she did it. And that is how she lived her life. She passed that along to Carrie and I. And so I continue that. So when I see something in my little world that I can fix, we fix it. Now, obviously I can't fix everything, but we all see things, and I don't mean the guy begging for money on the side of this corner on the street necessarily, but there are millions of examples of people in need. And maybe it's not about stuff either. Sometimes it's just about talking to somebody.
Right.
And my wife is a hugger. She hugs anybody. It drives me crazy because I keep thinking to myself, didn't we just do this whole COVID thing? I mean, but you can't stop her. Impossible. Yeah. She's kind of like my mom in what way. She's like this sort of beautiful, graceful, loving person, just wants to give everybody a hug to make them feel better. And I mean,
she's a good girl.
You really can't have enough. Yeah.
She's a good girl. Isn't that what Debbie used to say about Kat? Yeah, she's a good girl.
I said that last night. I spoke at the Reagan Library 2 nights ago, and they asked about Kat, and I said, what did my mother think about Kat? And I said, well, she thought she was obviously very talented, and, she was happy we were together in many ways because we're very, very compatible. But then she would pause and she said, but, most importantly, she's a good girl. The way she said it, it was so beautiful. And by the way, she didn't say that about a lot of people. Like, like here's another line. She would say, well, she's one of us. Like if she said that, you're like, whoa, you're in some high class company here. So, if you heard those words, you were doing pretty good.
Wow.
No, I think you're one of us, Todd Fisher. I really do. I feel
like
do.
We are all kindred spirits here, for sure.
For sure. And again, like I said, if you want to learn more about Todd and hear him tell these great stories in his own voice, check out that audiobook, My Girls, or just buy the book itself if you're one of those people who read. And really kind of a lost art these days, I guess. But, some people still do it, I guess. But
that's the good thing about the audiobooks. That does sort of transcend it all. And it is fun to hear. And Carrie's books too, by the way. You go get Carrie's books and audiobooks. It's awesome. She won a Grammy Award, for one of her audiobooks. I mean, she did such a killer job. I love listening to her audiobooks. Sometimes when I'm driving, I just listen to one of her audiobooks. I get a laugh. I've heard some of her books several times, and I always get a laugh out of it. I have hundreds of hours of home movies of us growing up and then even later in life. And sometimes you watch those movies, but I have a unique, great position in life that I have a mother and a sister that produced amazing movies, wrote amazing books, told amazing stories, did amazing shows, and I can go back and look at all this content anytime I want, including the private stuff that I have. But I mean, think about the depth and breadth of content that I have available on both my mother and sister. It's rare that a person could say, my home movies include Star Wars, or How the West Was Won, or Singing in the Rain. I mean,
incredible.
Wow. Not a bad little inventory of content.
Not at all. And you were out at the sets too, the Star Wars shooting locations and sets, weren't you?
I actually grew up on, all the sets with my mother. She would take Carrie and I to the sets. I have home movies that's on the set of How the West Was Won and Molly Brown and many other movies. And
your MGM studio experiences are amazing. For a kid, forget about it.
Well, and to be able to play on those back lots. I mean, I literally grew up on those back lots. Carrie and we would bring our friends. We'd have birthday parties on the back lots, on the pirate ships and showboats, and on the Tortuga Bay, and the Western towns. And that was pretty cool. But, when I visited Carrie a few times, during production, and I took some pictures behind the scenes, but I didn't want to also bug her. But there's some really cool interviews with Carrie and my mother on the internet from that era that is worth watching. I forgot the guy who's doing the interviewing, but there's a particular interview with my mother, Carrie, and I, and it's at the time when Carrie's not getting along with my mom. But they decided to bring my mother on the talk show, and it really made Carrie uncomfortable. And you could see her body language is, she had just written Postcards from the Edge, and but then they bring me out, and you got to watch her body language, and you watch what's going on, and literally you'll see there, like I would be talking, she would finish my sentence, or vice versa. And you could really, at one point, the guy says, wow, I can really tell you guys are brother and sister. I mean, it was like we were twins at times, although we were nothing alike in many other ways. But there was a bond between us that was very strong, and nothing ever could have broken it. But except her leaving, of course, but the reality is that those bonds exist for many siblings, regardless of how different you might be. I mean, literally, I don't relate to a lot of the things that happened to Carrie. That's on the Orient Express, actually, that picture. That's Carrie, my mother, and we're on the Orient Express traveling from Venice to Paris. And great memories, of course. But, at this point, though, Carrie is back into understanding my mother. Like, there was a time where she didn't get along with my mom, but you can see there, she's starting to say, oh, this lady's pretty cool. I used to say to Carrie, she's always been cool. Those last 10 years were kind of a waste of time. But she got over it, and they became very close, in the end, which was wonderful to see, because I didn't like being the middleman. I had to become this sort of, I was like the answering service. So they wouldn't talk to each other. So they would leave messages with me. So Carrie would say, tell mom I can't come to this such and such. I said, tell her yourself. No, I can't talk to her. And then my mom would want to talk to Carrie, but nobody would put her through to Carrie. And that used to piss me off. I'd be like, God, that's so freaking rude. I mean, but Carrie just was in a place because of her own drug problems and all the things that were going on where she just couldn't face my mother. And it was a sorry state of affairs. But when it lifted, it was amazing. And that picture you had actually was that was about the time, because that's when Carrie got sober right there. That was like her second birthday right around that time in the AA program. And so she was really having a number of epiphanies, and you could see how bright and shiny her face is there. But that's the epiphany right there. You're within a year of her accepting my mother again, and then starting to become very close. So that's a really, by the way, what's cool about that railroad, you have to get dressed up for dinner. Who does that?
What a concept, huh?
I mean, look, you see, we have to wear, I didn't even have a tux. There were people in tuxedos. That's all I had with me. Yeah.
Now you wear pajama pants to the grocery store, right?
You saw me.
Well, not you, Todd, but people.
Yes, I do.
Todd's guilty.
Look, I get away with a lot more than they did, So for me, it's different. I do get recognized, occasionally, but nothing obviously the way they do. So I can dress down at different levels and get away with it. And also guys have a little bit more grace than the girls. My mother would have never gone out without looking her best. I mean, forget it.
I can't imagine.
She was trained by the people at MGM. That you represented the company, and you represent a certain standard in show business as a celebrity, and therefore you will act a certain way. And if you didn't, by the way, you were sacked. And so those that couldn't dig that rule were fired. My mother actually loved it, and her wardrobe is insane. I have hundreds of her clothes outfits, by the way. We've also auctioned off a lot of those over the years to raise money for different causes. And it's, somebody actually wrote in and they said, I can't believe your mother will be really upset that you're selling these clothes. And I said, well, for somebody who actually knows her, I can tell you that she would be thrilled that I'm sharing this with her fans and using the money for good causes and things like that. Mm-hmm. And besides, I have 800 outfits, literally. Is that her with Lucy?
That's her with Lucy, yeah.
Yes.
Lucille
So
Ball.
check this out. You'll love this. So Lucy, I just moved out of the house. I was like 17 years old. I had my first house. And my mother was worried about me. And, she didn't have a husband at the time. So she used to live a little bit under a guilt trip that, that I didn't have the proper round of parenting because I didn't have a father, right? So she would show up to the house with Lucy.
Oh,
and
boy.
Let me tell you, buddy, that was intimidating. So it's kind of like knock, knock, knock. Who's there? It's your mother. And then I open the door and standing behind her, and you see she's a foot taller than my mother, is Lucy. And she's got a serious look on her face. Forget that nice smile right there. She had a baritone voice for a female.
Oh, yeah.
And then they come in and cross-examine me about what I'm up to. And man, that was always like a trip. Let me put it that way, because of course, I grew up like everybody else watching Lucy on the Lucy and Ricky show and all that, and so I saw her as a comedian. But I'm telling you, there was not a lot of jokes being told in my living room.
Yeah, I bet.
She was a tough cookie, that's for sure.
I didn't hear anything like, Lucy, I'm home, or whatever. No, but she was so, pleasant and a really good friend to my mother, who at times felt that she needed backup. And my mother had a posse, and Lucy was a member of the posse. Ann Miller was a member of the posse. Esther Williams was a member of the posse.
Wow.
And these girls, June Allison, these girls stuck together, traveled in packs. You didn't need to worry about too much any abuse coming out there. Esther was a big girl too, by the way. And Ann Miller, another big girl. I mean, those girls could take on any guy, I can guarantee.
Wow, it's like a gang. Did Carrie have a posse?
Well, Carrie, when we were growing up, we had we traveled a lot, of course, but, we also didn't really fit into the school box. Carrie never, it was really on the writing. Carrie was never going to finish school. She ended up going to the London Dramatic Academy and getting a degree, but she never even finished high school because she kind of blew it off. But she was already so well read and all of that, we had a strange upbringing. So our friends went back in time with us to elementary school. When we went to New York and she went to school in London and all that, she had a different group of friends. Griffin Dunn was a lifelong friend. Beverly D'Angelo was a lifelong friend of hers. Charlie Wessler, producer, lifelong friend. Beverly and her were like a wrecking crew. I mean, those two girls, you put them together, they take anybody down. I mean, the funniest things I ever listened to in my life was Beverly talking to Al Pacino about raising their two kids. She just ate him alive. I mean, the guy could not compete with her. You think, oh my God, Al Pacino, he's like a genius, whatever. But let me just tell you, you have met your match. Between Beverly and Carrie, you wouldn't want to tangle with that bit. Oh, wow. Man, they just eat you up. And of course, Carrie would defend Beverly and likewise. And when Carrie was friends, she had a lot of friends over the decades and, stayed friends, with Meryl Streep and people like that. And you saw Meryl Streep when Carrie passed away, pay tribute to her. And there's good reason for that. But there's a second layer of loyalty in friendship. And the people I mentioned, fell into these other layers of friendship. But, they were really there when Carrie was having hard times, not always doing the right thing. And they stood by her. So Meryl was one of those people. And, that's a beautiful picture. And of course, that's right around the time of Postcards from the Edge, this picture here, where Meryl is playing Carrie. And Shirley MacLaine played my mother in that movie. And Shirley came to me and said during pre-production, and she said, I want to talk to you about, I'm playing your mother, and I want to talk to you about preparing for that role and get some notes. And I said, well, we really don't need to do that because you are my mother. I mean, in every way, she had that same, in many ways, had that same personality. Because we were talking about, she's very much like my mother in many ways. However, I don't, and I've always remained friends with her. She's a very lovely person. I don't know her to the extent that like I know my mother for real, but I knew that like when she was going to sing in that movie, good times and bum times, I've seen them all, my dear, I'm still here. I knew that she was going to have that same sparkle because she did. She also sparkled in the spotlights. I mean, there you go. And that's her doing the scene where she's entertaining at the party. And of course, the famous scene on the stairs where she's talking about the dress twirling up. That scene is a funny scene and very interesting because it's a true story. The thing that people didn't realize is that I was in the room when all that happened, and they didn't really understand the context. The context was it was during the play Irene, and it was after the show. We were having a party at my mother's brownstone on 74th Street, New York. And in the party, everybody's from the show is there. So these are all of the people in the cast, the chorus girls, the chorus boys, all these people. And everybody's getting a little lit up, and it's late. It's 1 a.m, and my mother's singing and doing like what you saw Shirley doing in that movie, except at a certain point, her dress twirled up, and she didn't have any underwear on. Now, that really upset Carrie, and so much so that she writes about it in a movie and turns it into that scene, the super famous scene with Meryl Streep, and Shirley. But here's the thing. I was at the same party watching the same thing. I didn't think anything of it. Why didn't I think anything of it? We all got, everybody was naked around each other for the whole show. There's 12 costume changes. Everybody's running around naked backstage. I mean, is this going to be somehow shocking all of a sudden that I saw, somebody's underwear off or whatever? I mean, we saw it all backstage. As a young boy growing up, let me tell you, as a young boy growing up, fantastic stuff. Getting to wander around backstage.
Wow.
I'm telling you, I got to see some of the greatest stuff ever.
I'll bet.
And so, like, I never understood why she was so uptight about all that because, it was really just sort of in passing. It happened in 5 seconds, but it really blew her mind. And years later, I was like, I don't really understand why you're making such a big thing out of this. I didn't even hardly notice. Now, you'd think the boy would be more upset anyway, right? No, the girl's upset. But anyway, there were a lot of beautiful women in the chorus. Carrie was in the chorus as well. But I got an amazing show every time I went backstage. I would time it a certain way, so you'd be there during the critical costume change times.
Yes. Sure.
And they didn't care. I was
right
just little, now, by this point, by the way, at Irene, I was already, 15 years old. So I'm really appreciating some of this stuff.
Old enough
but
to
I did grow up on it.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up starting probably, very young. I was seeing a lot of that. And, I do think we're a little Victorian in this country anyway about all this stuff,
Sure.
Carrie loved England and bought a home there in the very end because I think she felt that they were a little more advanced in these areas than we are.
Yeah.
They were less judgmental. Carrie was not into judging people. Our whole family was kind of like out of the judgment business. First of all, the way we behave, you couldn't possibly be in the judgment business, but I don't think anybody is perfect to be able to be in the business to begin with. We were always like, no, we're not going to judge these people. These are cool people. So consequently, you find yourself in England where they were very accepting of her mental health conditions. Drugs are legal. The whole, we're over here still stuck in the mud over just say no. We got to come up with some new answers here.
Right. Right.
The irony of you saying just say no while promoting an event at the Reagan Library is not lost on me.
That's right. And here's another one. It can be done. That was his other big famous thing.
Right.
He had some good ones, let me tell you. But that was Nancy's, the whole
yes, I understand that. I know.
Nancy and I, we think you should just say no. At the time, that was actually, it hadn't been explored before. But, like you see where we are, we haven't made any progress that I'm aware of. And so, I grew up obviously doing drugs with Carrie at the same time she was starting on drugs. I started on drugs. We did drugs together. And at a certain point, I stopped doing drugs and she didn't stop doing drugs. And, and there you see the difference. I had a different way of approaching it. I did not liked being out of control. She liked suppressing her thoughts. She would talk about her personality being out of control. And so she would use some of these drugs to suppress her emotions, her feelings, her thoughts. It made her feel more normal, like her mind was always racing. And there's no way you're going to understand this, or I'm going to understand it. I saw it, I watched it, I've had it explained to me, but that's what it was. I was involved in all of this intimately, and so I watched her take certain medications to sort of smooth that out. So that, because she was always over analyzing things and seeing things, but it's also what made her so
I was
brilliant.
just going to say that, Todd. It sometimes, it's the Achilles heel. It's the thing that makes you so great. It's your best strength. It's also your worst weakness. And it seems like
double-edged sword.
Yeah, her ability. I don't know if your sister ever had an IQ test, but I'm guessing that if she did, she would have been very, very high.
It was up there with like some of the early forefathers. I mean, she truly had, and part of it had to do with how well read she was. I mean, when I was like 11, she was reading Nietzsche, and I would come in the room and I was like, "What are you reading?" And she would show me this book, and I'd be like, "What the hell is that?" Oh, this is a really cool philosophy about, and all I'm hearing is, I mean, I just know what she was talking about. I mean, she was into things. She read everything. She could read a book a day. She just gobbled things up like that. But the thing, the bipolar disorder, is what gave her this unique viewpoint on everything. She could see things differently than you and I, and then she could articulate it. So it's unusual. Not all people can, of course, articulate or write down what it is that they're seeing. That's so different than what you and I are seeing. And a lot of what she saw made us laugh, made us cry. She saw things and was able to explain it in such a unique way that we were all amused and entertained by it. I had one of her first speeches, and it was her writing a little roast about my mother. And the reason why I have that speech, and I found the videotape of the speech being made, and she's talking about my mother. And when she's reading the speech, it's on a legal pad. She finishes the page and she puts it aside. My mother grabs the page. And then she continues. You see the angle is my mom and her in the camera angle. And then she continues reading. She puts the page aside. My mother grabs the page. And this whole thing goes on until my mother has all the pages. Well, I found those pages in one of my mother's drawers the other day.
Oh, my God.
And I had found the clip.
Just the other day.
And what's amazing about it is it's the birth of that satire and the way she's looking at things. And the only reason why we have it is because of my fanatical mother saving everything.
Wow.
Carrie was putting it down.
The ultimate
like,
collector, Debbie Reynolds, the ultimate collector. It's astonishing.
She really was an amazing. She had the collector's gene.
Half the stuff I have came out of the trash at Carrie's house. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
It ended up at my ranch because my mother didn't want to give it back to Carrie because she knew that she wouldn't understand. Because she threw it away the first time, why would she throw it away again? So what my mother would do, and I have all these boxes, and it says send to ranch. And we had a big archive space at the ranch, and now it's here. But she kept sending these boxes to the ranch full of just stuff that she'd pulled out of the trash can. Debbie Reynolds, the dumpster diver.
Incredible. Well, glamorous Hollywood star, dumpster diving. Wow.
She had the collector's
probably in
gene.
high
Now,
heels and sequins.
Sure.
yeah, with the pearls and everything. Hey, Todd, so obviously Debbie had a strong collector's drive. Carrie collected all kind of crazy esoteric things. But I mean, what is it about you that makes you a collector? What interests you outside of being the family archivist, which you do to a great degree? But what is it that you collect?
Well, I started because of my mother when I was very young. She started collecting Meissen and Dresden soldiers that were about 12 inches tall of the early French and English wars, American wars, Lafayette, Napoleon, these kind of famous things. And as a little boy, those soldiers were on my shelves in my room. And then she would collect arrowheads and things for me. And that led into having early on some early American firearms. like, Colts and Winchesters and things but these were movie guns that I had, but they were actually antiques. So I started having a few guns, and I started having interest in history at that point. Like, what were these things attached to? Why was that war fought? Where was it fought? What weapons were fought? So I started, when I was in my 20s, when I was 11, we were in Europe and we were traveling around. My sister and mother were going into every single antique store in Europe. That was the goal, to be in every store. And they were buying all sorts of things that girls want. But me, I was like, oh, man. So I saw some military medals in England in an antique store, and I started collecting military medals. And then I got to the point where I probably have hundreds of medals in my collection. There she is with her gun. My mother was actually a pretty good shot. By the way, I'll come back to the medals for a second, because because I was collecting guns and medals. That is why Carrie gave me her blaster from Star Wars, is because she knew I had a gun collection, and that's how I got it. And also, just to put things in perspective, when Carrie first got the script in '76, my sister was somewhat uncoordinated. In fact, when we were little kids riding bicycles and she would get hurt, I would get in trouble. And I used to say to my mom, I mean, she just fell off the bike. What do you expect me to do? You have to protect your sister. Well, I don't know how I'm going to do that. We're riding down the hill together on different bicycles. But this led up to me and Miguel Ferrer teaching Carrie to shoot, because she looked very uncoordinated when we first handed her a firearm. She looked like a girl throwing a baseball badly. She didn't know how to hold it. She looked uncomfortable. So we took her down to the Beverly Hills Gun Club, and both Miguel and I used to shoot regularly together. And we taught her how to hold a gun and shoot a gun and be more comfortable. And that led to, obviously, her looking a little more comfortable. Obviously, she looks pretty good, to me in the Star Wars movie. She looks like she knows what she's doing. And so that was our goal. And no one knew, that was going on in the background. But that was Miguel and my job, was to make sure she didn't look like a dork with a firearm. But that's partly why she then gave me the blaster too, I guess, so sort of in tribute to my participation. So besides the firearms, also the military medals I was very passionate about. When my mother was at the MGM auctions, I came to her and I said, look, you got all these costumes. And that's great. But, people might be interested. For example, she had just bought the Three Musketeers outfits with Gene Kelly and Van Heflin. And I said, we should get the swords, because people would want to see the swords. And she goes, yep, you're right. I should get the swords, And then we would go down to another movie. And I said, well, this is cool. But, How the West is one. I mean, we should have the guns. People would like to see the guns, with the costume. You're right. We should have some guns. You're right.
Let's get the
and then she started doing this. She started saying, she was collecting the movie Gigi, which won for Best Picture, and she said, I think I'm going to buy all the furniture from this scene, and I'll have all the costumes, so I'll have the whole thing. And then I said, well, if you're going to do that, we should have the lights and the cameras. And she looked at me like frozen for a minute. She goes, you're right. We should have the lights and the cameras. So I started. At 15 years old, I started collecting the lights and the cameras, and actually at 14 years old, and then that led to me becoming probably I have one of the largest private lens collections in the world, cinema lenses. We had all the costumes out of the one. That's Gregory Peck, Robert Preston, Thelma Ritter. That movie, in my opinion, one of the finest Westerns ever made. It paid for our projection room. It went over like a year over budget, by the way. And my mother worked the last year in trade because they didn't have the money to pay her.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow, that's unheard of these days.
I also have sitting in my foyer the camera that filmed that movie. It's a Cinerama camera. It uses 335 millimeter cameras tied together, which was a very unique process in order to establish a very large widescreen image, but not very practical to have to modify every theater in America. So a guy named Mike Todd developed a process called Todd AO. Now, Mike Todd was married to Liz Taylor, who's my father's best friend. Liz Taylor was my mother's matron of honor, and vice versa. And Mike Todd was best man. And he developed a company called Todd AO, which was at the time American Optical. And they developed the bug eye lens, which went on to shoot around the world in 80 days, which was the first widescreen picture without the use of Cinerama processes. So it was leading the way to develop these widescreen processes, which was supposed to bring people back to the theaters because people had been, gravitating towards the tube in their house. And that was a nightmare for the theaters to think the studio heads. So I started collecting. I have that camera, by the way, the Mike Todd. There's only one camera. There are actually 5 Cinerama cameras, but there's only one of the Todd AO cameras. I have the lenses that shot Ben-Hur, Spartacus, all the great musicals that you could think of. From Singing in the Rain to, Gentlemen for Blondes. I have, I could just go on and on. I mean, I have Citizen
You had
Kane.
the Panavision camera that shot Star Wars.
Well, yeah, and I still have the lenses for that. But, I have lenses right now on loan over at the Academy. They're doing the Godfather exhibit over there, and I lent them Gordon Willis's prime lens set that I have from The Godfather. So they're using those lenses. And about a year ago, I had the Citizen Kane lenses there. So that was Wong Howe as the director of photography. And you know what's interesting? Those
Todd,
lenses,
when are you gonna open your own museum? George is opening a museum.
He's tried. I mean, the museum.
Well,
the drama with Debbie's museum was. I mean, what a story that was.
It's a saga, it's up there with
Star
Wars. But
yes.
I'm the stuff that I have will find its way in a museum. In fact, I was just chit-chatting with the Reagan people because they have enormous space at that gallery. And I was walking downstairs and he showed me this big space and he said, do you think you have enough stuff for this? I was like, you have no idea. But I mean, I have the camera dollies and the big cameras, the big lights. So I could set up like my mom's vision, was to show you the whole thing, the cameras, the lights, the set pieces. And I have Cleopatra set pieces still.
Wow.
I have a lot of unique things. I don't have obviously what we used to have, but I have enough to put on a dang good story. So I'm chatting with them about that. I'm going to do it. I was tempted because I have 5 acres here in Vegas just to build my own museum on the property here. And in a way that would be easier for me than having to, travel to look after something remotely. Also, the Reagan Library, of course, does traveling exhibits. They're bringing the Dead Sea Scrolls in there, and things like that. So there's some impressive, they bring in big collections because they're a legit museum. I tell you something about the Reagan thing, if I may. It's truly an underrated thing. I mean, it's so impressive. And the words that they're using just do not do it justice, because I say the word library and a lot of people start to yawn and think about a library and where do I check out a book, and then if you say the word museum, that's also got some older connotations to it. It's really an experience. So what they're doing with the Star Wars thing, connecting to the Reagan history with the Star Wars Missile Defense Program, is really an experience. It's something remarkable. It's educational. It's very entertaining, but it's well beyond the boring concept of just staring at books or staring at fixed exhibits. They have a lot of audiovisual things going on that keep you really entertained and educated. The docents that they have there, and they're basically the caretakers that tell you stories while you're looking at things. For those of you who don't know what a docent is. Those people are really motivated. They really know their stuff and they tell great stories. They're great storytellers. And that's key. A museum can die out of boredom because of it's an ancient sort of process. I mean, we are not programmed anymore to react to standard old museums. So you got to do entertaining, exciting things. And they really have done that there and are doing it. So I'm on board if they want to do that. We're going to build a museum here in Vegas, by the way. Also, there is plans for that's been approved, and there hasn't been any giant announcements, but it's out there. It's happening. But see, that's very limited for me. I have a big Vegas collection. I have every costume my mother ever wore from 1963 forward. Bob Mackey's, Trevia's, etc. I have Carrie's first. Those pictures you showed of Carrie and I on stage. I have all of our costumes when we were kids. And the guitars that you showed pictures of.
I was shocked when I realized that they're, considering Vegas's place in live entertainment and American entertainment, that there isn't a place where I can go see Bobby Darin's tuxedo or Wayne Newton's. Now
I got to encourage you to do something. Look up on YouTube Bobby Darin, Debbie Reynolds on a Bob Hope special. The two of them do a Sonny and Cher spoof.
I know it very well. I know it. I'm a huge Bobby Darin fan, and I know that bit very well. Yes.
Have you seen Bobby Darin do with Andy Williams the trio with My Father do Doe a Deer?
Absolutely.
That is awesome too, right?
Yeah, it's great. But yeah, it's incredible that there's not a place to see that stuff. So good to hear.
We've always
that's
felt this
happening.
way. My mom used to always say that about Hollywood. She was like, "There's no Hollywood museum. Come on."
Right.
It's shocking. It's just stunning to me. And this Vegas, they have a mob museum here and they have some touring exhibit stuff here, but it will happen. And ironically, it's going to be downtown, not in the county. But that's okay too. We'll take what we can get. But having a Vegas museum is important because every major entertainer you can think of, so many movies. I don't mean just Viva Las Vegas or Ocean's 11. I mean, so many movies in part or otherwise were filmed here all the way up to contemporary times. All the great stars worked here. I have the Rat Pack costume still in my collection. Tuxes of the boys, so to speak.
Wow.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I've got Shirley MacLaine stuff and Margaret. I've got Liza Minnelli. We have some things that we can help them out with because so much of it is scattered around the world. Well, isn't that what it was all about? That's why she did it, right? She was thinking ahead. I'm going to preserve these things because somebody somewhere someday will care.
Yes, absolutely. Preservation was, I believe, the key to Debbie's drive to collect all the things she collected. Have you been to the Sphere yet? Have you been to the Sphere?
I have.
Who'd you see?
I sure have. No, I actually went to the opening when they were just demonstrating the technology, and they had all the screen. I'm supposed to go to the Eagles, by the way, because they're friends of ours. That'll be the first concert I've seen, and I'm looking forward to that. My wife's not a big fan of like giant crowds, so I have to navigate that. But I know a couple of people we can navigate around a few doors. But it's like, it's an impressive piece of technology. It really is. And it is a new way to entertain and show things. It's very challenging from a staging perspective. Not just any show can go in there because you have to restage your entire show. But the sound is unbelievable. And the video presentations all around you are amazing. It is a whole nother level, of entertainment. I welcome it. I mean, I think it's cool. I'm old school, I still like the old nightclub act stuff too, and we go to shows all the time. My wife right now just went out to do a nightclub act with a friend of hers. And, we're kind of like that. We love watching the older shows, the Righteous Brothers and whoever comes to town. And there you go. There's the Sphere.
Is that the Sphere?
That's the Sphere. Todd, I got to ask you, I mean, as we're talking about the Sphere, we all know what we want to see. We all know what we want to see on the Sphere. Can you make it happen? Can we get the damn Death Star on the Sphere, Todd?
I said to somebody the other day, they were asking me, they said, what is the resolution of those panels? And they have had the Death Star on the Sphere, by the way.
Oh, they have done it.
Good.
Oh, I didn't realize that they actually did it because there were so many memes of the Death Star as the Sphere.
Well, of course, now they're running ads, but on the inside, I actually asked somebody. I said, could we actually run Star Wars in here and reformat it in some way and watch this movie? I mean, I think that would be a trip because it is, spatially speaking, it's pretty unbelievable. The size and space of it. And the resolution of the panels, it's not that they're that high resolution, it's just it's so gigantic, it adds up to massive amounts of resolution. It is obviously the biggest video screen presentation anywhere in the world. And that, you're looking at the outside, obviously, that's one thing, which is impressive as hell. But imagine the inside's the same kind of thing, and you you could break it up any way you want and show whatever you want. They've done obviously a bunch of concerts. And a friend of mine is a Deadhead, and he went and saw the Grateful Dead in there. And I think they're still there. But he wanted me to go to that. And I was just like, I'm not a big enough Deadhead fan, but I am a big enough Eagles fan. The scene in Postcard from the Edge, where, if you remember that movie, there's a scene where Carrie finds out that she had been sleeping with the same person that Beverly D'Angelo had slept with literally the same day. And it was Don Henley. Now in the movie, they don't tell you that it's Dennis Quaid, in the movie playing Don Henley, but no one knows it's Don Henley except for me. But Carrie was playing a cop in the movie. Yeah, exactly. Carrie was playing a cop in a movie at the time, kind of a low budget detective movie that a girlfriend of hers was directing, and she just did that as a favor. And it was not a great movie or anything, but that's where she was with Beverly and ran into Beverly. And when she found out that they had both slept with Don Henley and he delivered the same lines to them to land them, Carrie went over to his house with her uniform on, and what you're not allowed to do, of course, is leave the set with a firearm. it is blanks, but it is a gun nonetheless. But who's going to tell Carrie, she's gone, right? So the armorer, I'm sure, was freaking out. But she goes over to his house and unloads all 6 cylinders on the guy with blanks. But he doesn't know they're blanks. So, his life flashed before his eyes. And it's a great scene in the movie. But, that's what's kind of fun. Is this art imitating life or life imitating art? It's like, Carrie did create a lot of interesting things that make great film, and so that's an interesting scene. But, that's pretty low. I was pretty good friends with Don back then. And I really did not stay friends with him after that for obvious reasons, because this is my sister we're talking about. Right. Yeah, there you go. So look at that. Wow. It's overwhelming, what they can throw up on that screen, up on those screens. And the other thing is that literally there's tens of thousands of speakers separately fed from a computer system, and they can literally have any sounds coming from anywhere in thousands of different places, even in different languages, all over the stadium. So there really is no bad sound. Problem with big sound systems and stadiums is, you're attempting to throw sound great distances, and they have to have delays, and you have to get really loud. But this, since there's speakers literally everywhere, the sound does not have to get out of control loud, and consequently, it's a better quality sound. So it's a great experience. From a technical perspective, I'm a techie. I admit it. Yes. But I would, if there, I just have to accept the fact that is a amazing thing. It's. I'm not sure if it's worth $2 billion, but
I don't know. I think they're setting a new standard for the future, not just in Vegas, but everywhere.
You know what? If I was a shareholder, which I'm not, I would be looking at that very closely, because I'm thinking like, okay, if you want to spend this kind of money, it better be making some big bucks back. No, I would be afraid to invest in that, to be honest with you. And so you got to give them credit for stepping out and developing a new technology like that. I'm loving it. When I was in Vegas at 15 years old, I brought the first wireless microphones into Las Vegas. I was the first person to put a sound console in a showroom, in the room. Prior to that,
this was for your mom's show, right? Wow. It's for your mom's show? For your mom's show? Yeah, I was like, it's absurd to do sound behind glass in the light booth. You can't hear what's going on in the room. We need to put the console in the room. So she went to the people and said, I want to put a console down in the room to do the sound. And they said, no, because we need to sell all these seats, and the ones you want are the ones for the high rollers. Sure, the we VIP have booth. The casino. So my mother called Howard Hughes and said, I want the booth. And of course, we had the booth. So now I didn't have the center booth that I wanted, but we had the booth. And so amazing.
I put a sound
but Todd, that's amazing, because that's also impacted Broadway and all kinds of other live entertainment genres there. So
it wasn't that it was
huge
my
contribution.
Idea. It wasn't really my idea in the true sense of the word, because there were plenty of concerts, that had sound systems, out in front of the speakers and such, but no one had done it in a showroom or in a live theater. So in that sense, it was innovative, because no one wanted to they were like, no, we have to hide these things.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I understand there's a magic and all that, but guess what? It doesn't outweigh the fact that the sound man can't hear. I mean,
Right.
let's like I think it's
You want to
kind
hear
of a
the
balance
sound
of
in the. Yeah, you want to
So
hear the sound in the actual room. You don't want to be somewhere else to mix it. It's
well, I
awesome.
remember the first time I ran sound, the unions here said, no, you can't run sound because you have to be a member of the union. I was 15 years old. And my mother called, they said, my mother called the head of the union, which is a guy named John Flaherty who ran Local 1 for IATSE. And she said, look, I want my son to do my sound. They're saying he can't do their sound. And he's like, she called Korshak, to get his name, of course.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And then that's
Sidney
that.
Korshak calls the head of IATSE, says Todd Fisher needs a union card. Guess what? I got a union card. So I was a member, to this day, I'm the youngest member of IATSE in history, due
amazing.
to the phone call from the right people.
Wow. I mean, my God, how much Hollywood and show business intersect and like cross your desk? It's just incredible. It's really amazing. And I know you grew up in it, and it's the only life you know. But occasionally, don't you kind of pinch yourself and say, what a perspective, my God.
Now, so Carrie used to tell funny stories about that because obviously that question's been asked a lot. And,
Sure.
We used to say, well, we really don't have any other perspective. So, this is the life we know. And the only reason why we actually knew that our life was different was when television started coming out and they had situation television on, such as Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. We started looking at those shows and saying, oh, wow, that doesn't look like our house, or anything I've ever seen before. And it was actually, and I'm telling it as a joke, but it was actually kind of revealing that was a life that we didn't understand. And so we started to recognize that we had an unusual life, but it was the life we knew. Also, my mother was really brilliant, at also balancing all of this. You got to remember, she's running screen for all of that for us. So we had a regimented household. We had dinner at a certain time. We had all sorts of rules like other kids had, and we had to what you'd say almost like a normal household in that regard. Clean your room. We're not going to have the help clean your room. Clean your own room. So there was. Obviously, I didn't have to do things that a lot of people did. Like, I don't think I ever made my bed. In fact, when I went to college, I had moved away. I went away to a summer college prior to the first semester of college, and I had never been away from my mother's life. And I had rented a condo or condominium, and the laundry started to pile up, and I was like, what's going on here? So somebody said, fluff and fold.
Fluff and fold, man.
So we had a lady named Letha who had been my laundress since I was born, literally. And Letha did all the laundry, and like, she was into it, man. I mean, she was on top of this. This was her life. She did Debbie Reynolds' children. I mean, she wouldn't even wash my clothes with somebody else that she didn't know. And, she had all the high-tech equipment, and that was her trip. So we had great laundry and monogram towels and never had to make our bed. And so I did have to clean my room. That was her attempt to have normalcy exhibited in the house regiment. But it was a little hard to get used to moving out on my own, because all of a sudden, like, God, no one's doing the bed. I mean, how does that happen? And but I did find fluff and fold. So I've been able to adapt, overcome, persevere.
There you go. That's all that matters. Isn't that something that Carrie had printed
Carrie
out
had over her bed.
Had
That's
over
right,
her
right
bed
over
in her
bed.
bedroom, right? And what's that a line from?
Well, it's actually a Clint Eastwood film, Heartbreak Ridge. But
Heartbreak Ridge.
When Carrie
I love
lost
that movie.
her
I'm
best
sorry.
friend, he died of a drug overdose in her bed.
Yes.
She was traumatized by this. His name was Greg. And when he died, Carrie went into rehab. And the thing that I used to help her along was we watched war movies together. And we did this because obviously World War II in particular, but obviously any war, great adversarial challenges in life. And I used to say, yes, you've been through a difficult thing, but so have others. And we get along, we move on. We get over it. We tough it out. And I would watch these movies and you would hear phrases, like that. And when we got to Heartbreak Ridge, there was Clint Eastwood going, adapt, overcome, persevere.
Yes.
And she goes, oh, I love that. So I kept saying that to her every time she felt like she couldn't make it. I kept saying adapt, overcome, persevere. So that literally is, to this day, to the end, was painted over her bed as one of her favorite phrases. And it was there for more than one reason. It was actually there also as a reminder.
It's a reminder. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you guys certainly had an incredible relationship. And again, like I want everyone to do listening to the show, obviously listen to the audiobook of My Girls, or get the book itself, or go check out Defending America in the Galaxy, Star Wars and SDI at the Reagan Library in California. And for tickets and information, go to reaganlibrary.com/Star Wars, running now until September 8th. So you have the whole summer to go check out these incredible artifacts from the Carrie Fisher collection, courtesy of her brother, Todd.
Yeah.
Well, and there are other people that have given a lot of things there. So it's not just me, but there are things there that I think are remarkable. I mentioned some of the exhibits where people, sort of picked up pieces showing how the props were put together. And, I don't even know who or how that happened, but I'm glad it did, because it's important sometimes to understand how these things are made and how these things are done. I mean, there were great challenges to not having the big budget for Lucas. And so it's cool to kind of see how they adapted, overcame, persevered, to make a great film with not a lot of money and zero support from 20th Century Fox. So that was truly a great example of that. And they really show you a lot of those examples in there. They also have a speeder in there. They have a lot of other things. Some of the things are screen used and some are not. But it doesn't really matter necessarily that it's not screen used. There's another dress there that's from the finale, and I had a Medal of Yarman that we put with it. I can enhance some of the things that they have. I have a beautiful portrait of Carrie's head, torso. I mean, it's just one of the most beautiful paintings of her ever. I put it on display there, and of course I mentioned the Jedi bikini painting with sitting next to the costume is spectacular. These are things you'll never see. I mean, that painting's never been shown. And, some of this is rare. It's personal. I have a picture there that Carrie wrote to me. So it's a picture of her in the metal bikini, but it's written to Kat and I. And a lot of people are like, well, who's Tawfish? And I always say, well, that was what Carrie called me.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, why did she call you Tawfish? And the answer is because we had a housekeeper / nanny called Mrs. Yang, and Mrs. Yang was obviously Chinese, and Mrs. Yang would come down the hallway in the morning, and we're talking like Carrie and I are like 5, and she would come down the hall, shuffle, 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 knock, knock on the door, Callie Fish, tiny giddy up for school, I love you, baby, and shuffle, 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 Tawfish, time to giddy up for school, I love you, baby. So for the rest of our lives to the end, Carrie always signed off by saying, I love you, baby. And that's how I said goodbye to her. And I always called her Callie Fish, and she always called me Tawfish. So in honor of Mrs. Yang, we kept that going for, 50 plus years.
Wow. I got goosebumps hearing you tell that story.
No doubt.
Well, it's what's cool about it is there's the freaking handwritten words, and I told that story sitting next to it on purpose. I'm hoping they're going to run the clip because that is the story, right? I mean, it's like this endearing thing. No one will understand. These are things that no one would really understand or know. So I'm here to tell these stories for a variety of reasons, but hopefully the stories inspire people, and I say inspire, inspire people to love deeper, to say the things you need to say now and not miss out. That's the one great thing about what happened. When they did leave, it was obviously a shock and unexpected, but there were no unspoken words. I didn't need to say, oh, gee, I wish I could have said I'm sorry or I love you or whatever. We had already said, I love you, baby.
Yeah.
By the way, I just wrote a song with a friend of mine that's a tribute song to my mother and sister. And in the song, I have the last voice messages from my mother and sister woven into the bridge. and you hear their actual words. And I also used a lot of words that Carrie and I had written in our 20s, talking about our mother in a different context. So this song actually has in the verse, it's actually "my girls," using that word, and the chorus is "dreaming, dreaming of you." Because I did an interview on Yahoo where I talked about how I have very vivid dreams of my mother and sister, and they visit me a lot. And dreams are interesting because they're composites. You don't actually dream about something you already did. It's not like a replay, like a movie. When you dream, you dream something very unique and new. And of course, with Carrie, man, I mean, the pool is deep, as far as the material.
Yeah, right.
So I have these wild dreams about the two of them. And, you hear me with the stories. I mean, my head's full of a lot of stories. So you can imagine what's in my brain that unconsciously is there. This is the stuff that I'm rattling out while conscious. If you put me under, man, it's look out. So I have these. So that I talked about that on Yahoo, and it got like millions of hits. So I talk about the dreaming and the song and all of that. I haven't released the song because, frankly, I don't quite know how to do it or what to do with it exactly in this new world of digital domains.
I know
I'll figure it out
podcast. I know a podcast you can premiere it on if the bug gets up your butt.
Let me. Yeah. No, actually, it's a good idea. Honestly, I have to figure out first how to sort of secure it on a platform that's appropriate. But I'd be happy to do that with you guys because, your people are going to dig the song because, not only is it words written about Carrie, it's Carrie writing about herself. For example, in the Carrie verse, it said, "swallowed a lunar pie." Now, like the Rolling Stones were talking about Mother's Little Helpers, Carrie that was code for dropping acid, swallowing a lunar pie. Now, it's especially relevant because of Star Wars, lunar pie. So,
I guess so, yeah, right. That's lunar pie. That's a hit of acid. Sorry, I had to.
So there's a lot of little code things in there, and it's a cute. It's written by a guy named Greg Giuffria, and Dean Castronova, who's the drummer and lead singer for Journey, does the vocal on it. I do the background vocals and the verse stuff. Yeah, there's Carrie and I playing, and what's funny about what you're looking at right there? I have the piano sitting next to me that we're playing on right there.
Oh, wow.
I just restored it. It's been through a lot. It was Eddie and Debbie's piano. It eventually went to the Greenway house with Carl. When all that fell apart, it ended up at Debbie Reynolds Dance Studios for like 50 years. Then it ended up in storage, and I just completely refurbished that piano. And you can see why I refurbished the piano, can't you?
Of course.
You're looking at why. I would normally not care about refurbishing a piano. I did it because it was our piano.
Yes.
It was it's where Carrie learned to play piano. It's where I learned to play.
I didn't know that Carrie was a musician at all.
Well, she was never a serious piano player. Obviously, she was more of a singer than a pianist, but she could play actually fairly well. She loved Joni Mitchell songs, so she could play like Court and Spark and certain songs like that.
Yeah.
I'm not a piano player, but I learned to play on that. I play guitar, but these are important things in our history, in our family history. And so everybody has these kinds of things, if you know what I mean. We all have artifacts that need to be preserved, that should be preserved, so you can hand it down to your children and hopefully tell the stories to them. I mean, in my case, people have maybe a broader interest because of Carrie and Debbie's fame. So the stories maybe have a little extra meaning, but hopefully you have siblings and you have grandchildren that will carry on these stories because, that is the history of storytelling, isn't it? I mean, we are all storytellers. We come from thousands of years of storytelling. People used to do it more primitively, but that's how stories were conveyed about great things that people accomplished or great works or things that your family did or where you came from or where you were going. And that would get handed down to generation after generation. Eventually, we invent the printing press so we don't have to remember as much. But you know what? People like me still do. And then we eventually get into radio and film. And now we do a great job of telling our stories that way. So we've gotten better at storytelling, certainly more visual. But it really gets right back down to the same thing. You got to have somebody to remember and tell the story. Like George Lucas to sit around and pull this story out of his you-know-where is pretty amazing. I mean, I always wondered, I was like, why all the weird animals in the bar, George? Because like, I'm kind of like this, I'm not like a big, like if it gets too far out for me, then, like if things get too weird, then I lose, it loses me. I'm more of a realist story. I like real stories. But so I said, so right up to that point, I'm buying into everything. Even the guy in the big black helmet breathing so heavy, I can buy into all of that. But I don't know, when we get in the bar, and he goes, what do you mean? We're surrounded by aliens like that, weirder looking things that all the time. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, oh, you go to the zoo, don't you? I mean, look at all the animals around. It's like in his mind, we live around all these weird looking characters all the time. And so therefore it's not that weird that in some places maybe they evolved to be able to communicate. And if you recall in the movie, they don't speak English necessarily. Right. So you kind of have to go with it, right? If the George is saying it, it's got to be true, right?
Well, and also I think the cantina also was more than just animals on display. It was a bunch of very diverse individuals from different backgrounds and different places all coexisting in one place and getting their drink on. And
I think, you're right. I mean, I'm not sure if that was the message that was intended, but there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. Diversity back all the way to 1977.
Yeah, like we try to get everything to fit in some kind of a box. Right. I mean, George would be the first one to tell you that a lot of the stuff that happened. It's like when you work on any film or any television show or things, things evolve. I don't care what's written on the script. And as a director or producer, you hope that you've hired talent that brings things to the story and expands beyond what's on the page. And I know that this thing was spinning like that. You could feel it. It's like this movie was exploding. It was expanding like the universe, it's like, and there was no way to control it. He was controlling it to a large degree, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like even the stories of the technology, I was involved in some of the special effects technology in this, and I know where the cameras came from. And again, they didn't have the money for the special effects cameras. So they used the cameras, the high-speed cameras that shot the 10 Commandments. So think about how old those cameras are. That's what made the special effects.
Is that right?
Yes.
The 10 Commandments, the same cameras that shot Charlton Heston in the 10 Commandments also shot Star Wars. I didn't realize that.
So Mitchell Camera Company made the cameras called VistaVision cameras back for and the first time they were used was in the 10 Commandments. And I was telling you the story about Mike Todd and all the widescreen. So Paramount Studios was the one that was coming out with VistaVision as an answer to the other studios' widescreen processes. So that's where VistaVision came from. They made 2 high-speed cameras in the bunch so they could have some slow motion stuff in the movie. Obviously, that movie is not special effects oriented, right? But years go by and they are trying, Lucas is trying to get a special effects person. He goes to Doug Trumbo. He can't do it because he's working with Spielberg. So he says, hey, there's a guy named Doug Stump and some other guys that we used to work with me on some other things. And they didn't even know what to do. They went to the guy over at Paramount and borrowed those cameras.
That's right.
They didn't, and they lent them to him because they're like just laying around doing absolutely nothing. And the first going out, they burned up the drive, we'll call it the movement in the camera that's pulling the film down because they were running it too fast. It was not designed to run that fast. They burned up the bearings. So then they were down to camera 2 is the only thing left. So they had to put a big sticker on the side of the camera. Don't go past this many frames per second, so they could survive. You bring everything broken back to Paramount. Wow. Not that they would care necessarily, but this is part of that struggle I was talking about, which makes it such a miracle, the whole movie. And as I was saying, it was like this thing was in motion, and all these things, these pieces of the puzzle are flying around, and it's a miracle. That it is what it is in many ways. Now, and obviously George certainly gets all of the credit in so many ways, but there were a lot of people that stepped up. And that guy at Paramount I'm talking about was literally the guy that had been there since the 50s, who worked on the 10 Commandments, who said, hey, I got an idea. this will do it for you. You'll have similar to 70 millimeter quality for your special effects. So took a lot of people, to make it happen. And not just great personalities like Mark and Carrie and Harrison. They bring magic, but obviously C-3PO and R2-D2, they're magic too.
Yeah.
I say I'm not into science fiction, but of course, Silent Running with Bruce Stern, and you had Huey, Dewey, and Louie. I mean, that was the first droid that I think I ever fell in love with, as a viewer, and I think he played on that, and
yes,
you got to love it, So that movie happens to be a great film. I didn't love the ending because no one likes a sad story about the Huey by himself watering the plants in outer space.
Todd,
and that was Doug Trimble.
Like I said earlier, we could just spend hours talking to you. Incredible stories, incredible closeness to the history of Hollywood and in particular Star Wars, which is what is primarily of interest to our listeners. Thank you so much for all of the time that you've spent with us tonight and telling us amazing stories about your wonderful sister and your incredible mother. It's so great to be able to keep that spirit alive and that legacy, because, like I said, she was one of the pioneers in keeping a relationship with the fans, which is
yes, and it's spilled to Carrie, and that's partly why Carrie is so loved. I think she she did give back, and she was approachable, and she was real. I mean, she wore her heart on her sleeve, and turn your broken heart into art was what Meryl Streep said. That was one of Carrie's quotes. And I that's a real. That's a person that's being very open and real with you. You're not, and that was a gift that was handed down to us by our mother, and Carrie continued it. And since I'm the last man standing, I shall continue it.
Yes, and you're doing a great job, my friend.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Very fortunate.
Such a pleasure to talk to you and meet you and hear all these stories. And like I said,
I'll figure out how to get the song once I figure out how to platform that. I'll certainly share it with your audience, because I do think your audience, being Carrie oriented, will appreciate that. It's and to hear her voice. And by the way, in her voice message, she's in England, in the production, and coming home, and so
shooting Star Wars, the sequel.
Yes, exactly, exactly. The last words spoken prior to getting on the plane, to to coming back to the U.S. So pretty pointed last words.
So. Very much so. Well, thank you for being such a great steward of the legacy of your sister and your mother. I'm a big fan of both. So much
I love what you guys do. Keep being rebellious. It's awesome.
We love it. That's what we do here. We're rebels. Thanks, Todd. And please stay in touch. Anything we can do to spread the word of what you're doing to preserve the legacy of Hollywood and your family, please let us know here at Rebel Force Radio.
Anytime.
We will keep you in the loop. Absolutely. One thing you'll learn about me is that, there's an endless amount of stories. I was like privileged to be able to remember. I was also sort of the family memory machine in many ways. Carrie used to come to me all the time, to remember things like, what happened here and there. Cause she couldn't remember everything. Cause of course, after the electroshock therapy, that was really a zinger. It ironically though, did not affect her wit and other things. It did affect her long-term memory.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You mentioned in the book, you created some scrapbook type things for her, or gave her photos and stuff like that.
I loved her. I would always, for her birthday, every birthday, I would bring her movies of our life, and we would talk about it, and she would marvel at it in many ways, and then that would help her remember, because that is what spurs back those memories. So she would see those home movies or different things, and she would remember. So it can be done.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you again for your time, Todd, and providing us with those stories, and also inspiration in the power of family and what's really
that's right.
And I think you embody that, my friend.
I appreciate that. That's exactly what I want to do.
All right. Well, if we can be of any service to you and your mission of doing that, please let us know.
I will. I appreciate it. We will do it. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks so much, Todd.
Take care.
Chewie, get us out of here!
All right, special thanks to our guest this week, Todd Fisher. Such a great guy, amazing stories. If you're able to get out to the Reagan Library, please do. It's running all the way through September 8th of this year. Go to reaganlibrary.com/Star Wars to get your tickets. Tickets start at just $25. Cheaper tickets available for seniors and kids and all of that. Some incredible artifacts. Jim, I had no idea the lengths of the collection of one Todd Fisher.
Oh, my God.
Carrie's blaster, all this stuff. You know, it was sort of like the Wild West back then where actors could walk away from the set and carry a few props away. Very different from today's day and age where they recognize the value of this stuff where, you know, back in the days of Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher, it was trash. It was literal trash. They were just thrown out in dumpsters. And now it's incredible, priceless treasure.
When I think of, they say that Debbie Reynolds took out a $180,000 loan to buy her initial collection of props from MGM. And when I think about what some of those individual props or costumes sold for once Debbie finally put them up for auction, I mean, one piece almost like brought her investment back 1,000 times.
Yeah, what do you think the ruby slippers were worth?
Just what amazing foresight to understand that Hollywood history means something and it should be preserved. And now you see George Lucas with his museum and all of the things he wants to do to protect the process, the art of narrative art, storytelling. Yes. And George is building that museum in Las Vegas. Todd's in Las Vegas. George is in Los Angeles. Oddly, he should be in Chicago. That's those are old wounds. That's still
story for another time.
Yeah, I know. But I will be there for when that Lucas Museum opens. And should Todd Fisher want to donate some of the Carrie Fisher collection to George's museum, he kind of hinted to that in the interview, that could be a possibility. Well, or whatever he wants to do to promote what he's collected as far as Hollywood history goes. Todd Fisher's a guy I'm going to really keep a close eye on. I'll tell you that. Moving forward.
What I thought was so interesting is the fact that Todd talked about how Debbie Reynolds started out as a fan before she was a Hollywood darling. She was a fan of Hollywood, and that is a spirit that she never lost. And she realized that other fans like her would want to see these artifacts and see these things. So, fans do it best. And I love that Debbie was able to keep that spirit of being a fan throughout her career and even after her career. So very cool stuff.
She was an amazing woman. Something we did talk about with Todd is my favorite Debbie Reynolds film, Albert Brooks's Mother, which is one of the funniest movies you'll ever watch. And it was Todd and Carrie who actually pressured Debbie into diving into that role. And,
is that right?
Yeah, because they felt she was so close to the source. And it's just great, you know? I mean, and so it's like, wow, we really get the curtain pulled back on this family that really is Hollywood royalty, and they're so generous in giving, all of them. Debbie with all of the efforts she made to preserve Hollywood history, and of course, Star Wars fans, Carrie Fisher obviously meant the world and then some to us. And now Todd is doing just a great job in keeping that family legacy alive and accessible to fans like us. That's great, man. That is just great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Hey, so a little bit of housekeeping here in Rebel Force Radio. Just to note that we will not have a weekly Rebel Force Radio podcast next week, nor a proper Rebel Force Radio after show looking at the season finale of Acolyte. We will have a, I guess what we call first blush review, some initial thoughts as the Acolyte season finale airs next week. But look for that proper Rebel Force Radio Acolyte after show to happen on the Monday following the premiere the following week, where we'll be taking your phone calls and not just looking at episode 8, but we'll be looking at the whole season, the whole Acolyte story. For better, for worse, we know you've got lots of opinions. We want to hear them all your opinions, all your theories, good, bad, and different. That'll all take place in due time, but on the Monday following the premiere of that. But we're not going to leave you hanging. Got, summertime vacations for families, and RFR is certainly no exclusion to that. So appreciate all of your
swank
flexibility.
On the beach.
Swank on the beach. So Monday, July 22nd, and that's when we'll be back with official podcast Rebel Force Radio coverage of the Acolyte and the big season finale. So that's going to do it for us. If you want more Rebel Force Radio in your life, there's no better way to do it than through our Patreon. So support us over on Patreon, patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio, or just head over to rebelforceradio.com and click on the Patreon banner, and you'll be taken to a whole selection of choices depending on your budget and how much you want to support us here at Rebel Force Radio. But as Mac always says, a buck gets you in the door, and you're listening to exclusive podcasts that you can't get anywhere else. You're not going to find them on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. You're only going to find them on Rebel Force Radio through Patreon. Now I'm talking about the Babu Freaks and the Q&A, all those exclusive podcasts that you hear us talking about and referring to on the after shows and on the weekly podcast. You can get those all when you become a supporter of us here at RFR. But you know what? The best way to support us is just to do what you're doing right now. Listen to the podcast, suggest it to your friends. The Acolyte's on. People are saying, what's this Acolyte? It's all over my social media. I'm hearing people, some people love it, some people hate it. Say, you know what? Here's how you get to the heart of it all. Go to rebelforceradio.com and listen to their after shows, and they will put it in proper context for you. That's the best way to support us. Also, we love to have your reviews. If your podcatcher of choice allows you to do so, we love to have them. Just one simple rule, please.
Make them good.
All right. That'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much to Todd Fisher, and thank you to the Reagan Library for making this all happen. Appreciate it. Make sure you go to Reagan Library. The website over there is reaganlibrary.com/Star Wars. Spend your summer, spend your early fall amidst the archives of the Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds family, courtesy of Todd Fisher. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Rebel Force Radio. Until next time, for RFR, my name's Jason.
I'm Jimmy Mack.
And remember,
the Force will be with you, always.
Baboon ass.